14th. Would you please read the roll? Read the roll for us to check in.
Fish. Here. Saltzman. Novick.
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Hale.
Here. We have one item remaining from our morning calendar, which is a 4/5 agenda item, item 370-1.
Declare City Council opposition to Mississippi's Protecting Freedom of Conscience from Government Discrimination Act and temporarily suspend the authorization of using any city funds for travel by city employees to the state of Mississippi.
So, as I said, when I mentioned that I would be bringing another such action to the council, I'm very sorry that we have to act on the second of these two items in a very short time. First North Carolina and now Mississippi, having enacted what I believe are both unconscionable and unconstitutional legislation on the subject of human rights. So we have taken a stand in previous instances with Indiana last year, successfully joining a coalition of states, cities, and private business that got the state of Indiana to reverse such a discrimination effort. We hope that the same thing happens in North Carolina and also in Mississippi by the combination of public and private efforts across the country. So this resolution is before us, open to discussion. I think we might have someone here who wants to speak on the item, but any other council members want to say anything at the outset? If not, is there anyone here who'd like to speak on this item? Please, come on up. And sorry to have kept you waiting. I know you were here this morning, so.
It's okay. I'm fine. I've moved here and I'm retired, so relaxed.
Where'd you move from?
From Western Massachusetts, Northampton.
My brother lives in Great Mary.
Possibly even more progressive than Portland, but we're only here.
That's a tough crowd. Well, give us your name and support that outrageous statement.
Strike that from the record.
We're not going to get into a Hatfield and McCoy situation here, are we?
No,
Kenner Swain, and so I have no family in Mississippi, but I have family in North Carolina. They're not happy with this, and I have had family in North Carolina for 300 years. So I have feelings about it, and I appreciate the city council. Was it Commissioner Novick who? I appreciate the city council bring this up. It might seem that Oregon and Portland are a long way from Mississippi and North Carolina, but you know, if you study some of the books by Colin Woodard and David Fisher, you know that Portland and Oregon are not that far away from Mississippi and North Carolina in many ways. And I think that and I'll be brief, the resolutions like this is not going to be the last time something like this happens that is completely unconscionable and unconstitutional. And it's not the last time that businesses, public and private, will hopefully do something to express their feelings. I think it would be good, a couple of things. One, just a small copy editing kind of thing or a suggestion. You might say the so-called freedom and so-called, and because
I like that.
The moral high ground of who's for freedom is absolutely what's at stake, and what discrimination is. All of that is up for grabs, and really the language is very important. And so that kind of thing.
I move that amendment.
I second that amendment. Thank you. We'll do that, and we'll take that as a friendly amendment, and it's
intended as such.
It is so ordered.
Second of all, you know, in contending with these kinds of issues, which are symbolic, and you have a whole lot of things with big money on the table, so I'll be brief. You know, you think about what would Gandhi and King or Gene Sharp do in these kinds of situations. I would suggest, perhaps in future, as more of these come along, to invite people in Mississippi or North Carolina to meet anywhere along the Oregon Trail to hash this out, to talk about it, you know, to do something to say we don't just disapprove, but we're here for reconciliation in the long run. And Oregon, I don't know the whole history, but I don't believe allowed African Americans or blacks into the state. Didn't allow black people to vote until 1927. There was a Supreme Court case called Pierce versus, perhaps you know this, 1925 Supreme Court case where basically there was a very anti-Catholic thing where it was outlawed private schools were outlawed completely. So that was very anti-religious freedom and specifically anti-Catholic. So the point would be to acknowledge our own failings, sins, shortcomings, in the sense that Oregon, you know, is not very few of us have come to this point of view that we're at, 100 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever, but to make that kind of point in the resolutions perhaps going forward. Commissioner Fish, briefly, that T-shirt with the tree, I was volunteering at the Hoyt Arboretum, and they're for sale up there, and we'd love to have you come up and contribute. You can buy all sizes. They're there. They're there in the visitor center.
Actually,
at the
I wondered where it came from, so thank
They're
you.
in the visitor center at the Hoyt Arboretum.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak on this item? Then let's please take a vote on the resolution as amended.
Fish.
Aye.
Councilman Novick.
I really do appreciate the amendment because we should not be reciting people's self-serving language without taking note of how self-serving it is. Aye.
Fritz.
I thank Brian Adams for canceling his Mississippi concert and Bruce Springsteen for canceling his North Carolina concert, and Mayor Hales for not going to North Carolina for the to Mississippi for the not the launching, the christening of the USS Portland. It does make a difference, and it's more than symbolic. And even if it were just symbolic, it's necessary symbolism. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
I do have relatives in Mississippi, and I won't be visiting them either, but I'll be inviting them to come out to Oregon and see what freedom is like. Aye. Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to item 371.
Direct the Portland Bureau of Transportation to develop a performance-based parking management program subject to city council approval.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Commissioner Novick, do you have some comments to start this off?
Yeah, a couple. When we last approved increases to the downtown meter rates, we talked about the fact that we were going to be raising the rates throughout the central city without differentiation. And we were trying to meet certain performance targets, but we acknowledged that historically we hadn't really had a clear criteria for how we manage the parking system. And we acknowledged that sometimes what we do might seem from the outside somewhat random. Like every once in a while, we raise the downtown meter rates. Well, what should trigger doing that, and should we have some differentiation within the district? In Northwest, we decided years and years ago that it was time to start thinking about putting in meters, and we wound up arguing about that for 15 years. What we are hoping to do now, with the council's blessing, is establish a performance-based parking management program, which, as the resolution says, includes accepted performance targets and defined program parameters. That such parameters will include the purpose and prioritization of the parking system, performance targets and other trigger conditions, means of coordinating on and off-street parking in a more seamless system, criteria and procedures for establishing new meter districts and sub-districts, defined parameters for adjusting rates, frequency of adjustments, hours of enforcement, monitoring, evaluation, enforcement protocols, and communication procedures designed to inform the public of changes in parking management in particular areas. So this resolution, in fact, instructs PBOT to develop such a program and to elaborate and explain. I give you Mauricio Leclerc.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Senior planner with PBOT. Here with me are Judith Gray, also with planning, PBOT planning, as well as Dave Benson and Melissa McCready from parking operations. We have a brief presentation, and I think the commissioners greatly summarized what we're here to do. So if you don't mind, we'll go fairly quickly. Again, the language of the on the resolution itself, on what is that we're doing, what is the process, the context on which we've been working on, and a little bit more specific as to what we mean by performance-based parking management. The resolution title says direct PBOT to develop performance-based parking management program subject to city council approval. We will go start a process, come back to you with the results. So the commissioner read the parameters, and we'll also discuss the next steps. This has all been wrapped up in about 2 year conversation with that PBOT has been having with the direction of the commissioner to have a holistic approach to parking. The scope they've been working on includes private parking as well as private parking, and we've had at one point 4 committees working on this at the same time, as well as many other committees on which parking is an element, such as, things that Bureau of Planning leads that affect the zoning code, for example. We've had over 50 meetings and briefings all over the city, and over 1,000 Portlanders we touched throughout our process. So summarizing the last year, we've had 4 committees, and one of them recommended, adjustment to the downtown. That was one of them. At the same time that they did that, they also said, please move to a performance-based parking management program. But also we have 3, the Central City Committee, where a lot of the meter areas are, recommended also performance-based parking management. But also Centers and Corridor, other committee outside of the Central City, we worked with them to develop a broad toolbox of parking management tools, and we want to integrate them into a logical sequence so that we can have a data-driven, logical, transparent decision-making process. So this is an effort that is actually citywide. This is guided by the comprehensive plan policies that you've been working on, and we have updated recently. But on the macro scale, we're talking about all things parking, holistic approach, but things are falling into 2 buckets. Private parking, what comes with new development, zoning code-related stuff, and things that are public. Those things that are public, we want to bundle them into a logical system that we're calling performance-based parking management, and those are affecting, and they're housed under Title 16 of our code and also in administrative rules. So this is the process to change those, and next time we'll be back, we bring in amendments to Title 16 and the admin rules. So very briefly, what have we been hearing from the public? 3 major themes. One is to better use existing parking. Before you create new one, let's make sure that we get better use of what we have. That applies not just to the private sector, but also our smart park. We have a peak about noon, but most of the nights and some of them in the evening, they remain empty. We can do better use, make better use of them. Also redefining the function of parking within the curb zone, make sure that it is for the highest and best used, and have the program to support that. On the on-street management itself, we've been working throughout the city, and very clearly we have to do more to manage on-street parking, given the increase in demand in our main streets, and the fact that we have limited on-street supply, and we're not going to grow it. So the better management is very important. Today, demand spills into adjacent neighborhoods, and we're doing much to address that, and we'll be coming back to you with more work on that end. And finally, more demand responsive management. Today, it is very challenging, as the commissioner said, to initiate parking plans and actually adjust the rates. We do it on average about in the downtown of once every 6 years. And today, we have technology, smart park meters, that allows us to do a lot more, not just to adjust rates, but also to collect information about transactions and so forth, so we can have better monitoring, know how the system works, and also have the ability to respond. So we're bundling that public parking effort into what we're calling performance-based parking management. It is under the umbrella of the comprehensive plan, so we'll be working under the policy for public parking that the system be to encourage safety, economic vitality, and livability of our commercial and residential areas, and as well as to manage parking to achieve the best and highest use. So we've been talking with the public about this performance-based parking management. What is it that we want to do? What is it that it would do? So it has not been developed, but our aim is that it's a citywide program. It is data-driven, clear, it is transparent, relies on performance metrics such as 85% occupancy to make sure that that's success, and that's what we can aim to. It maximizes customer experience on the parking system. You don't have to be cruising around looking for parking, and it's not driven by revenue, but actually by the performance of the system. It improves reliability of the transportation system, as you have fewer cars driving around, and as well as the overall livability of places. And includes industry best practices for the management of parking, and that includes the toolbox that I just referred to. So, as I mentioned, we had a lot of conversations with the public, and 3 of our committees, we really got 2 of them got to endorse performance-based parking management. That's the Central City one, which they recommended, that's in the middle there, that we develop performance-based parking management, including establishing performance targets, coordinated on and off-street. That is basically that the on-street and the smart park work more as a seamless system, and adjusting the parking prices to meet those parameters. The downtown meter rate, as I mentioned, also recommended as part of the rate adjustment that we moved to performance-based parking management. And the Centers and Corridor Parking Project endorsed a toolkit, that also, in a residential permit program, that needs to be integrated into this program. An example, we brought it to you at the work session. This is, clear. We like what Seattle does. Other cities aren't doing it. This is for downtown, and it applies to meter areas. Again, we're talking about more than just meter areas. But as an example, they have set up parameters between 70% and 85%. That's the target range. You collect information, and that gets published. You can see it here, Ballard area, in annual report in that case. What is the occupancy, what is the action, very clearly detailed, very transparent, done in a certain periods of the year or so. And then basically we tell you, the occupancy in this case is 83%. No need to act at this point because we are within the target range. If you're getting below, we will monitor it and then lower the rate. If it gets too high, we will actually increase the rate. It's simple as that. It's very successful. San Francisco has done it as well, and it has led to the benefits of getting traffic off the street, getting citations quite a bit down as a result, and in greenhouse benefits as well, as you get that traffic off. So again, I want to mention that it's not just about meters or permits, but also we have about a toolkit that we've worked with a consultant and a committee. It was a TGM project funded by ODOT, and we ended up with a list of 60 projects, 60 ideas that we can do to better manage parking, and we want to integrate that. So to summarize, these are the parameters that I think the commissioner read. I'm not sure I need to read them again, but it is to develop targets, basically, coordinate our parking, develop criteria for new districts, and in breaking up some districts so that in areas that make, in chunks that make sense, for example. Adjusting the rates and knowing when to adjust and how often, how to adjust hours of enforcement, how to do the monitoring, how to evaluate and do the enforcement, and also how to communicate all these changes to the public, and not only as to what we're going to do, but actually when we do it, there needs to be some predictability that the parking system will be there at a certain rate for a certain period of time so that nobody gets surprised. So all of that will be the core of the process that we'll be doing and working with that committee and developing a public outreach process and bringing all of that to you for adoption. So that's the presentation. So, and actually, before we end, I want to thank all the committees that have been working with us. They've done a lot of work, devoted a lot of hours, and we appreciate their ideas and their support.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Fitz?
How will the needs of people with lower incomes and the effects on people of color be evaluated and incorporated?
Yeah, equity is an element that is incorporated into everything that we're doing at PBAT. For the things that relate to parking, will be public parking. We'll be looking at tools that affect, they have some sort of a cost component, and determine what is the impact on low-income people, for example, and determine the proper action, for example. It could be that no action is needed. It could be that we need to provide some sort of a subsidy or something that offsets or mitigates the impact. So that'll be part of how we integrate tools into the different tools into performance-based parking management. So we'll look into it. We did it for the rate adjustment, and we're doing it also for the permit that we'll be introducing to you in June.
Other questions for Mauricio? Thank you very much. Let's see, do you have any invited speakers here, Commissioner Novick, or just those on the sign-up sheet?
Actually, I just have one more question. It says in the impact statement that the legislation doesn't have long-term financial impacts for the city, but it will.
This action will, not this time, because we're coming back with the formal changes. So at this point, we're just setting up a committee and coming up with ideas. Next time we come to you in May, our experience, so in May, so we're setting up for next time where it may have some fiscal impacts. Our experience, based on what other cities have done, is that it does not lead to more or less revenues. It's pretty much revenue neutral. But but we'll come back to you next time with the actual proposals, and then we'll fill that out appropriately.
So it does say that there are no changes in current or future revenues. Is the intent for it to be revenue neutral?
The intent is to to do what we do, which is manage parking for a certain objective, not by revenue.
Commissioner, I think this action, simply instructing the Bureau to develop a program in and of itself is not going to change revenues. Once we develop a program, it might potentially have some input, although as Mauricio says, it might not.
I understand that. My question is part of the way we're setting up the program, making it intended to be revenue neutral?
Well, I mean, what we're intending to do is to have a more rational parking management system. And sometimes that will lead to more revenue, sometimes it will lead to less revenue. For example, one of the effects of having meters in Northwest is to raise more revenue, but the purpose of having meters in Northwest is to better manage the right-of-way.
Right, so it isn't one of the criteria for success that it be revenue neutral?
I don't think that's necessarily the case, because if we had set that as a criterion for putting meters in Northwest, then we would have had to decide to cut rates somewhere else in order to offset that. And in terms of managing parking, I don't know that that would have made sense.
And I concur with that direction. I just want to be clear that there may be some increased revenue, which may be seen as a positive side effect or a negative side effect, depending on which side of the paying and receiving you're on.
I agree.
Good point. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. So do you have any invited speakers, or is there just a group?
We have people signed up.
Okay.
Great. Let's take those, please.
We have 4 people signed up. The first 3, please come on up, are Chris Smith, Chris Chiarini, and Riza Farhudi.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Mayor, members of council, good afternoon. I'm Chris Smith, Vice Chair of the Planning and Sustainability Commission, but testifying today as an individual. I'm going to try and connect the dots, and I'm tempted to say that the whole comp plan depends on this, but that might be just a little bit hyperbolic.
Wow.
But in fact, it is a keystone piece, I think, of success in our comp plan objectives. As we talked about here in work session a few weeks ago, part of the challenge in the comp plan is to facilitate Portland's growth, which includes growth in trips, while essentially keeping the number of auto trips constant, because we're very close to the limit of our infrastructure to accommodate auto trips. And adding auto trips would both be very expensive and contraindicate other goals that we have in the comp plan. We know that auto trips, one of the biggest determinants is the availability and pricing of parking. So parking will be one of the key tools to facilitate meeting those goals. And we know that off-street parking, in large part, responds to the on-street parking environment. And in fact, one of the things that screws up off-street parking is the perception of free on-street parking. And we know that on-street parking isn't really free. We just hide the costs other places. So moving to a performance parking system gives us the tools to very intentionally manage that. I think will be critical to achieving our overall comp plan goals, particularly those related to reducing drive-alone trips, and has the added benefit, generally, it makes parking available for the people who need it to be available. So I strongly encourage you to adopt this and start down this path. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you, too. My name is Chris Caccarini. I am the Vice President for Planning and Operations at the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine. We are the #1 school of acupuncture and Chinese medicine in the United States. We offer master's and doctoral degrees in acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and we are located on Northwest 1st and Cooch in Old Town, Chinatown, that we relocated there in 2012, and as part of a remodel of the old Globe Hotel building, Import Plaza building. I want to testify in favor of this proposal, and I have a couple points that I would like to make. Each day, we welcome more than 400 visitors to our campus. Parking is consistently the #1 concern in our customer and community feedback surveys. While 67% of our campus community use alternate means of transportation some of the time, half of all of our commutes involve a car. We see roughly, depending on the year, between 17,000 and 21,000 patients in our clinic. We have a student clinic, or roughly 50 to 70 per day. Out of that particular number, 89% of those drive to their appointments. Well, we want to continue to encourage more use of transit, cycling, and walking. Not everybody can do that. We will always need some parking to meet our various needs. Transportation alternatives are particularly challenging for those with disabilities, which is a large part of the community that we serve in our clinic. Parking management is critical to the continued success of OCOM. Old Town Chinatown, as you know, is unique in the sense that it has trip characteristics that are very different from, say, downtown. Both OCOM and University of Oregon reside in Old Town Chinatown. We have multiple clinics there, public clinics serving low-income patients. As you know, we have nightlife and 2 major tourist destinations in the Chinese Garden and Saturday Market, in addition to the standard office, retail, and restaurants. This requires a more customized management of parking. We, as a college, we're really looking forward to a clear data-driven and transparent decision-making process for managing parking. We've actually experienced this approach, so we know of what we speak. When we reviewed our own parking data, we learned that a significant number of our community members needed to stay longer than the meters allowed. In response, PBOT lengthened the stay of time to 90 minutes to 2 hours. This was a game changer for our clinic patients, given that our appointments are 1 hour and 15 minutes long. It gives them a little bit more time to get dressed, check in, and check out. We also provided bicycle use data to PBOT and have appreciated the support we received to expand our bicycle parking capacity as a result of the data that we captured. I'll wrap up. And finally, we found PBOT to be a beneficial partner, heavily focused on customer service. We look forward to working with PBOT on developing performance-based parking management system.
Great, thank you very much. I'm glad you had that successful pilot project of adjusting to make it work better. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hills, City Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Reza Farhoudi. I'm a Pearl District resident, and I serve on the Neighborhood Association Board. I also served on the Central City Parking Update Committee and the Meter Rate Adjustment Committee, but my comments today are mine alone. I'm testifying today in supporting the resolution and urge you to greenlight PBOT's proposal to develop a comprehensive performance parking management policy for your future consideration. Dynamically priced, demand-responsive parking management has many benefits. It will reduce vehicle congestion and emissions. It will help businesses by making it easier for customers to find a free parking space. It will help make housing more affordable, and it will support Portland's ambitious mode split and climate action targets. Performance parking will also succeed in shifting parking demand from the peak to the shoulders, that is, to locations and times where there is excess capacity. In the Pearl District, we have much higher demand closer to Burnside Street than we do north of Lovejoy Street. We also see considerably higher demand in the weekends and evenings. Implementing performance parking will raise prices where demand warrants it to make sure they're high enough to ensure enough free parking spaces. It will also help reduce prices where we have lower demand, allowing for better utilization of our public right-of-way, one of the most finite resources that we have in the Central City. So in closing, I hope that you adopt this resolution and allow PBOT to move forward and create a performance parking management policy that meets the needs of Portlanders in a rapidly growing and urbanizing city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
The last 2 signed up are Ian Studi and Tony Jordan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead, Ian.
All right,
you're on
thank you.
first.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Well, my name is Ian Studi. I am the Director of Transportation and Parking Services for Portland State University, and I'm also the Chair of the city's Bicycle Advisory Committee. I also served on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee for the Central City Parking Policy Update, and also as an alternate on the Centers and Corridors Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Suffice it to say, I've spent a lot of the last 2 years talking about parking, to the point that my wife would like me to stop. I would really like to encourage City Council today to support the resolution in front of you. I think that the performance-based parking plan that PBOT will develop will be a major step forward in really a smart, modern approach to how we tackle one of the largest obstacles in improving our transportation network and really how people get around our city and enjoy our city. If I may, while I'm not here to testify, specifically on behalf of Portland State, I would like to tell you a little Portland State story, which is, in case you're not familiar, has grown from 20,000 students to 30,000 students in the time that I've been there. That's a 100%, or I'm sorry, a 50% increase in enrollment, a commensurate or close to commensurate increase in staff, and a tremendous number of regular visits to campus on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. We estimate almost 1 million visitors a year. It's incredibly compact and incredibly challenging to manage parking for those folks, and we've done so with only a 10% increase in parking in the last 10 years. Largely, we've been able to do so because the system that we've invested in is twofold. One, the alternatives and really the approach to transportation demand management, providing access to our robust transit network and supporting the transit network with some very hard-earned dollars as well. We're very appreciative to TriMet and others and the system that the city has laid out that's allowed PSU to grow in a very economical and very sustainable fashion. But I want to point out that one of the key functions that's made PSU's growth and management of transportation successful is exactly the same kind of thing that you're considering here today, which is performance-based parking management. We adjust rates and adjust the availability of parking based on demand throughout our campus network of parking, and it has been enormously successful. We're continuing to modernize that system, and we're looking forward to utilizing some of the new technology that's becoming available. But I think that if you look at PSU as, in some ways, a test case, and we look forward to hopefully continuing to work with PBOT in a test or beta fashion, I think you'll find that this can be an enormously successful thing for the city at large. So, thank you.
Thank you very
You
much.
mind if I just ask one question?
Yes, certainly.
The other night, I had an event teaching a class at PSU. I had to be there at 7, so I ended up about 6:30 parking on Broadway, just near Lincoln Hall. But in the innovative parking you have on the street, so there's a protected bike lane on the other side of the car, and then the sidewalk. What's been the experience? How have people reacted to that parking configuration?
Quite well, and thank you for asking about that. The effort to introduce, in many ways, Portland's first on-street cycle track at PSU was one that was championed by the university, and we worked very closely with PBOT on that. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. While there's a little bit of challenge in learning how to park in a facility like that for the first time, and when it's really dark out, we see people miss the paint and they head over and park next to the curb. We've mostly ironed that out, and folks pretty much know what to do. And we find that they're often parking in the right spot. There's the occasional hiccup with a delivery vehicle or whatnot, but the benefit to those who are riding and who are riding to our campus on bikes has been enormous, and particularly the group that has identified themselves as interested but concerned in cycling. We found that that type of facility directly correlates with a positive reinforcement for cycling and encouragement to do so. And that's through some very academic research done by PSU staff and students.
I think the only thing that I learned is that I'm now conditioned to look at my rearview window to see if there's a bike coming, driver's side. And so since all I had to worry about is a car on the driver's side, it's remembering that when I then crossed over to get the ticket for the car, that I look both ways to make sure there's no bike between me and the sidewalk.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of adjusting. And I think that what the Bureau has planned in terms of protected bikeways into the future looks very positive. And I think that the designs that are there and that PBOT staff have been working hard to modernize and emulate from other cities are in some ways even a step above what we have on Broadway today. So it is a great example, though, of how parking can be utilized not just as auto parking, but as a buffer between two different modes of transportation that really we'd prefer did not mix if possible. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Well, and we have to keep experimenting. Some of these experiments have proven right the first time, some wrong the first time, some need work. So it'll be interesting to see how the cycle track idea evolves that way.
Well, we're always happy to help.
Part of the challenge is that people come here from other places and they don't know about this stuff. So every now and then I'll see a a driver stuck in the queue at the back of the line of parked cars who hasn't figured it out yet, that they're not moving.
Yeah, that's always a good for a chuckle. Yeah.
Welcome.
Hello, Mayor Hales, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tony Jordan. I served last year on 3 of the parking committees that were mentioned. Since serving on those committees, I founded a group called Portland Chupistas, which is a group that advocates for effective parking policy here in Portland. I'm the president of Sunnyside Neighborhood Association, but I'm not speaking on the behalf of the Neighborhood Association today. I support this resolution and encourage you to direct PBOT to develop the performance-based parking management policy for your review and approval later this year. Our public right-of-way is one of the city's greatest assets, and we have an opportunity to manage a significant portion of that asset to make housing more affordable, encourage commerce, make our streets safer, and to make progress on our mode share and climate action goals. There was a common refrain at all 3 of the committees I was on to use new ideas and technology available now to better manage our parking supply in a data-driven manner. We can learn from and improve on systems in place in other cities like San Francisco to create a fair and efficient system here in Portland. Concerns over on-street car parking drive much of the opposition to additional housing supply in our neighborhoods. The parking toolkit approved by the Centers and Corridors Committee provides a path to a less acrimonious environment for these developments, and the performance-based parking management is an essential component of that toolkit. These policies will enable neighbors to focus on other important issues and make it easier for developers to add the much-needed supply that we have. Convenient parking is also an essential resource for many businesses and commercial districts. By ensuring that there's always some space available nearby, this policy will stimulate business and increase customer satisfaction. Cash-conscious consumers will be able to find cheaper parking in areas with less demand, and quite possibly they'll see the lowest rates that we've seen in quite some time in downtown Portland, maybe lower than they were 10 years ago. But the benefits of performance-based parking management aren't only for people who drive. Pedestrians and people on bikes will enjoy downtown streets with less car traffic. In San Francisco, areas where SF Park was used to manage parking saw 30% decreases in vehicle miles traveled, and fewer drivers circling blocks while looking for parking equals fewer opportunities for collisions and injuries. Finally, these policies will help us meet our mode share and climate action goals. Performance-based parking management will enable more efficient use of existing parking supply, reducing the need for additional parking garages. Less cruising for parking will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and awareness of the true value of curbside parking will reframe discussions about the use of right-of-way for alternative modes of transportation and public space. There is one suggestion I have for improving this resolution. Several members of the Central City Parking Committee expressed concerns about the impact of allowing the shared use of commercial and residential parking in the city center. This is in the Central City 2035 plan. It's a good thing to do that, but this proposed change may significantly increase the private off-street supply available to visitors and commuters, which will make it harder to meet the mode share goals. Adding parking supply to rates, hours enforcement, and other adjustable variables in this resolution would acknowledge this concern and provide more opportunities for repurposing of existing supply when it's appropriate in the future. So thanks for taking this step, and I look forward to it.
The concern is, you're talking about existing private garages, right?
Yes, the Central City 2035 draft contains language that would allow existing supply that's off-street in buildings that's for residential only to be used for any purpose. It removes the designation between commercial and residential, and that's good because it will probably lead to less structured parking built and free up some supply now, but it could increase supply, which would make it harder to meet the mode goals because those are connected.
All right, good point. Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions? Thank you both. Anyone else that wants to speak on this item? All right, do you want to take action on this resolution? And let's take a vote, please.
Commissioner Novick, thank you for your great work, and thanks to your very able team. This seems innovative and thoughtful in the approach, and we look forward to seeing the fruits of the next phase of this effort. Thank you. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mauricio. Thanks to the whole team. Thanks to my colleagues. We are well on the way to a rational system of parking management. Aye.
Totally a treat, and Commissioner Novick are really bringing them home in the stretch here. So congratulations on this one too, and thank you to the team for your work. Aye.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, and thanks both to the team and the other folks that provided testimony here today. I think last point was an interesting one. You got to make sure that all the system effects, whether it's in land use or elsewhere in transportation, are thought through as we do this work. And obviously, PBOT's eminently capable of that, but I appreciate the point being raised. Look forward to seeing the next phase of the work. Thank you. Aye. Okay. Let's move on then, please, to the next item, which is at 2:45, and I think we have our honoree in the house. Are we ready, Commissioner? We'll take a 2-minute break?
Yeah.
All right, 2-minute break, and then we'll back.
I gotta grab my talking points.
Okay, we're going to get back to order here and have some fun. So we're returning to business, please. Let's take up that item, which is item 372.
Proclaim April 13th, 2016 to be a day of honor for Portland's first women fire chief, Erin Jansen's in Portland.
Commissioner Salzman.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the outstanding and honor our fire chief, Erin Jansen's, for her outstanding service and her many years of service to the city of Portland. She is set to retire at the end of this week, well, tomorrow, as a matter of fact, which happens to be her birthday as well. And she has provided excellent leadership for the Fire Bureau, and for the past almost 4 years that she's been chief. As was noted, she is the first female chief the city of Portland has ever had, fire chief. And she has served professionally for 28 years in this field and has really reached the peak of her leadership and has really helped the Bureau of Portland Fire and Rescue deal with the increasingly complex balancing act of responding to fires, but also dealing with the ever-increasing, in fact, majority of calls now for emergency medical services. And she has continued to be an innovator in looking at ways that we can better serve the emergency medical side of the equation while still maintaining our commitment to be there to save lives and property when we actually have fires as well. And she has helped pioneer the use of rapid response vehicles, which are two-person vehicles that can respond to low-level medical calls rather than calling out the cavalry, so to speak. So I want to thank you, and we have a proclamation here, but just want to personally thank you. You've been a real catalyst for change in Portland Fire and Rescue, and I appreciate having the chance to have worked with you in the last almost 4 years. So thank you. And we have a proclamation that the mayor is going to read.
Happy to do that. It says this: whereas Portland Fire and Rescue has had a rich 132-year history protecting lives and property in our city, and whereas in 2012, Portland Fire and Rescue added a milestone to its rich history with the appointment of its first female fire chief, Erin Jansen's, and whereas Chief Jansen's brought a wealth of experience as chief, working at every level of the Fire Bureau, being promoted through the ranks of lieutenant, captain, battalion chief, deputy chief, and fire marshal. And whereas Chief Jansen's has always pursued innovation and cutting-edge programs throughout her time with PF&R, from reinstituting the use of rapid response vehicles, to educating youth and after-school programs, to partnering with healthcare providers on a myriad of initiatives, Chief Jansen's has embraced all forms of innovation and change. And whereas Chief Jansen's has provided excellent leadership in carrying the Fire Bureau through Portland's challenging times, maintaining high levels of operation during record population growth and increased call volumes. And whereas the city of Portland would like to honor and thank Chief Jansen's for her 28 years of service to our city. Now, therefore, I, Charlie Hales, Mayor of the City of Portland, Oregon, the City of Roses, do hereby declare April 13th, 2016 to be a day to honor Portland's first female fire chief, Erin Jansen's, in Portland, and observe all residents to observe this day and to thank her. Thank you, Erin. Before we give you a chance for rebuttal, others of us might want to add some comments to Commissioner Saltzman. I've got this, and that is, any of us who deal with the leadership of organizations with strong traditions, I have some experience with that with the Fire Bureau and also with the Police Bureau, know that a change agent has to walk a careful line between honoring those traditions and supporting people's adherence to those traditions and making the change that you need to make. And I just really appreciate the way you've done that. Not just that you have done that, but the way you've done it. You've always been a firefighter's firefighter. You've always stood up for the Bureau at every turn, but you've been willing to move things forward in the right way. And that's an art. I tried to describe it in those words, but I've seen you do it. And you'll be, in that sense, a very hard act to follow as well, because there's always a need for change as a society change, and that's been true for the Bureau and always will be. But you've done that very adroitly, and it's been noticed and appreciated by your mayor. Yes, please.
Commissioner Fritz has noted on many occasions, and the mayor has also noted, that we have 4 current or former Parks Commissioners on this council. We also have 4 current or former commissioners in charge of the Fire Bureau. And so many of us have had the great honor, albeit for 2 of us very briefly, to work with the men and women who wear the uniform and provide such great service. I first want to say, Aaron, that it was an honor to serve on your interview panel and to learn about the many current challenges that the Bureau faced, and also to have a sense of how you stacked up against the other candidates. And as you know, when Commissioner Leonard appointed you, it was his view that I concurred that you were the outstanding candidate for the job, following an extensive search. It's been an honor to work with you on a number of things, and in particular, while we don't work day to day as colleagues, I have worked with you during 2 weather emergencies where I've gotten to see the very best of you and the Bureau under difficult circumstances. I know that Hannah Kuhn would kill me if I didn't say something on her behalf, because you and Hannah and Bill share such a deep friendship. And it was actually a wonderful dividend for me that you would occasionally visit Hannah in my office, so I got to see you. But Hannah thinks the world of you, and I know that you and she have a deep and lasting friendship. And finally, I want to echo what the mayor said, because today we're really celebrating public service. And Lord knows this is not the easiest time in our history to be in public service. We face a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. It takes a person of special grit and character to be successful in public service. And I think what you'll hear from all of us is that we have been honored to know you and to work with you. So thank you.
Well, I would like to say that it is, I'm very honored and I'm very humbled to be here before you today. And that it has been an honor to be your fire chief, and it has been an honor to work with all of you and all of your staffs. I have the utmost respect for all of you and your staffs, all of the people in the city that work so hard to make the city work, move the city forward, and advance the best interests of the city. I think that until people are up close and personal, they may not recognize or appreciate how much and how hard everyone works. And I want to say that I know that about each and every one of you, and I greatly admire and respect each of you. And it's been an honor, again, to be your fire chief. So thank you very, very much.
How many females were there in the Fire Bureau when you started?
When I started in 1988, there were 3 of us. We were all on probation. Well, there were 3 of us on probation at the time. By 1989, there were 2 of us. And then in 1990, there were 3 of us again, of about 800 men.
So I surmise that in some ways was more challenging than being the first woman fire chief and entering a highly male-dominated environment and being the trailblazer who was able to do all of those physical tasks that I certainly would not ever have been able to do. That is part of your legacy in my mind, that having been one of those first 3 and succeeded and worked your way up to the top. And then I know that you have had significant challenges as a woman decision maker in our society, as I, as the 7th woman on the council, have also experienced. And this morning we had some direction to look at gender issues in our city bureaus. And I hope it's not another 132 years before we have another female fire chief. And I also hope that there is increasing awareness, not only within the Fire Bureau, also within the police bureau, also within some of the other traditionally male-dominated bureaus, that women can and do as well or better, and that when we have women in authority, we have earned our way to be there, and that it will in the future be easier than in many ways it has been for you. So I wanted to acknowledge it's not only the honor of being the first woman chief, it's the honor of having worked your way up and been part of that groundbreaking trio. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a chance to give a speech to the Women in Transportation seminar. Of course, I touted the fact that we had a number of women in positions of leadership, not enough, but some significance. And of course, a woman fire chief is a distinction still. But I said that actually what Portlandia was doing is reaching down and saying, come on up, sister, let's break that glass ceiling together. So thank you for your effort in doing just that.
Absolutely.
Chief, as Commissioner Fish said, some of us have been fire commissioner for a very brief period of time. I think I was that for maybe 6 weeks, but it was an intense time because
It
we
was
were
intense
threatened
time.
with budget cuts and we were trying to figure out how to explain exactly how devastating it would be to start shutting down fire stations. And I really appreciate the education you gave me on the Bureau in that short period of time. I also wanted to say that I really appreciate your support of the neighborhood emergency teams. Our net folks are going to be very sorry to see you go and hope that you'll be back to support the nets in some way in the future.
Very good.
Could we commemorate this moment with a photo with you and
That would be
perhaps
great.
invite Amy to join us?
That would be great. Thank you.
Come on up, please.
We're going to suspend the rules. Jerseys, that's probably the wrong word. Uniform.
Okay. Let's then move on to our remaining two items this afternoon, since it is 3 o'clock, and take item 373, please.
Amend regulation of lobbying entities and city officials to improve administration, clarify requirements, and auditor duties.
Okay, Auditor Caballero.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I am City Auditor Mary Hall Caballero, and with me today is Deborah Scroggin from my office. And Deborah oversees the lobbyist registration program in addition to her duties as the city elections officer. We are here with a proposal to strengthen sections of existing code that make transparent the activities and expenditures lobbying entities bring to bear on city policy choices and other decisions. The proposal also broadens the revolving door prohibition so that the public's interest is not made deferential to personal interests when officials, their at-will employees, and bureau directors leave their city jobs. The city's Code of Ethics was adopted in 1994. That document says the purpose of this government is to serve the public and calls on officials to treat their offices as a public trust. It also calls on us to ensure public respect by avoiding even the appearance of impropriety, and for policymakers to place long-term benefit to the public as a whole above all other considerations, including important individuals and special interests. In keeping with the Code of Ethics, Council in 2005 passed an ordinance requiring lobbying groups to register and report their activity. It also obligated certain city officials to report with whom they were meeting and when they received gifts from lobbyists. The ordinance authorized the Auditor's Office to establish reporting mechanisms and enforce provisions of the code. The model chosen back then emphasized disclosure, and our proposed amendments are in keeping with that choice. They require no additional resources for my office to implement. Our goal is to make clear the expectations and consequences of the code for the people who fall within its requirements. We think the public will be better served by a code that adds transparency, clarifies requirements, and is more straightforward to enforce. Deborah will now walk you through the specific changes, and then we have some invited testimony for you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. As Mary said, my name is Deborah Scroggin with the City Auditor's Office. So I have a brief summary of the proposed changes to City Code 2.12, the lobbyist registration program that I'm going to present, including a brief background on the program, why we're bringing these proposed changes now, and a summary of the major amendments. The stated purpose of the lobbying regulation program is to preserve the integrity of the decision-making process by making public the extent of lobbying activities. It's primarily a disclosure-based program that requires registration and reporting from certain entities and also from city officials. The program was passed in 2005 and has been in effect since 2006. Oversight and administration is conducted by the Auditor's Office. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of activity captured by the lobbying program currently. There's 39 registered lobbying entities right now. This number ranges between 30 and 50 throughout the year, depending on items coming before council. The types of organizations reporting activity range from small nonprofit organizations to multinational companies. The amount of individual lobbyists fluctuates between approximately 170 and 190, also depending on the issues before council. Right now, we have 188. In 2015, registered lobbying entities that are required to disclose this information reported $288,000 spent on lobbying, which is more than double the amount that was reported in 2014. These expenses include salary or other compensation to lobbyists, travel, advertising, gifts, and other similar items. So why are we bringing these changes now? The last time substantive amendments came before council was 2007, and we think it's overdue to present some changes. The initiating ordinance states that these regulations establish the transparency that fair and open government warrants. To that end, we think it should be continually updated and reviewed for effectiveness and to improve administration. In particular, there are areas that have caused confusion, both for lobbyists and city officials, and we want to address those with these changes. There are some really strong pieces of the lobbying program. In particular, the definition of lobbying is broadly defined to capture additional activity at the local level. Specific lobbying contacts between city officials and lobbyists must be disclosed in public reports for certain entities. And city officials are required to post their calendars of official activities, which balances out that transparency responsibility between lobbyists and city officials. These are all strong components of a lobbyist registration program. However, the pieces don't work together cohesively with the rest of the code unless there is little room for gray area, strong accountability measures, and meaningful enforcement mechanisms. The changes we're proposing today are a step in that direction. So the first change I'll go over is to close the lobbyist disclosure loophole that we think exists. Lobbying entities are required to register, disclose their activities, lobbyists that are working for them, and their expenses after reaching a certain threshold of lobbying, and that is set at 8 hours in a quarter. This singular threshold leaves room for financial expenditures to go unreported and disproportionately affects civic and nonprofit groups. That's because entities that spend significant amounts on travel and compensation and make other related expenditures may not need to register under that single hourly threshold. So with this proposed change, a lobbying entity would have to register after they spend 8 hours lobbying, the current policy, or $1,000 in a quarter. We think this will capture additional lobbying activity, be a more accurate picture, just using different resources. So I'm going to go into the prohibited conduct section. And first I wanted to address an amendment that we had before you for this item. And this amendment was regarding certain boards and commissions lobbying for compensation while serving as a volunteer city official. This is an important issue worthy of consideration. Unfortunately, we added it too late, and it did not get the same amount of time for comment and feedback as the other changes did. To allow the officials affected by that proposal to digest the information, air their concerns, we've proposed removing it for the time being. can go into more detail from that if you would like. Otherwise, I'll move on to the post-employment prohibition section.
I'm sorry, just, what was?
I'm not following that
still,
either.
Catching up from the previous one.
Oh, okay. So we submitted an amendment to this code, and that was to remove the section on,
PDC,
yes.
Planning Commission.
What section number is that?
Design Commission.
12080.
Yeah, 2.12.080. Section
So in other
F.
words, you're removing
An amendment to
the
our amendment.
restriction on those commission members
Yes,
from lobbying until you had
Simultaneously.
time to process it more.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, keep going.
Okay, thanks. So on the post-employment prohibition section, in general, these types of policies we think are preventative, good government measures. They serve the purpose of preventing impartiality, independence, and trust in city decision-making by imposing sometimes a cooling-off period, and that's what our code does. This period creates distance from the special relationships and access city officials gain throughout their time at the city. And these types of policies have another very important impact. They prevent even the appearance of impropriety. Cooling off periods are typically 1 to 2 years. We suggest a 2-year period to allow for additional turnover and to diminish the appearance that a former official could hold special influence over city decisions. Under the city's current code, all employees are prohibited from lobbying city officials regarding any subject they were personally and substantially involved in for 1 year after their term of office or employment. That personally and substantially policy has been difficult to define and is hard to monitor. The proposed amendments instead provide a clear separation of city officials from their public service. It also appropriately narrows the individuals covered by the prohibition. Instead of being citywide, it focuses on top-level officials. The proposed changes prohibit elected officials, I'm just going to go through them individually. The proposed changes prohibit elected officials and their at-will staff, once they leave the city, from lobbying for compensation or other consideration, current elected officials and their at-will staff for 2 years. In addition, city directors, once they leave the city, would be prohibited from lobbying the director of their former bureau and the current commissioner in charge of that bureau for 2 years. We think this proposal is clearer and stronger than current language while balancing the expertise and unique perspectives lobbyists can bring to government. So we'd also like to add some meaningful enforcement mechanisms to this code. At the discretion of the auditor, currently, the maximum penalty for violations of this code is $500. That has not been reviewed since the ordinance went into effect 10 years ago. The proposed change to the section would increase the fine from $500 to $3,000 per repeated violation. That's an amount that,
Just on that,
Sure.
if that's all, does it still provide for $500 for non-repeated violations?
absolutely, it would be at the discretion of the auditor, and we plan.
Okay, because I mean, given the language change, just reading the penalties provision, I wasn't clear on that. It seems to only talk about the period of repeated violations.
Right, so it would be up to $3,000 for repeated violations. And we would not charge $3,000 for the first violation, for instance.
Okay, but I think it
Right.
leaves it a little unclear. It doesn't say anything about non-repeated violations, so it leaves it, you sort of puzzled. Is there a maximum for a first violation, or is there any penalty at all?
So that would be something that we would clarify through an open administrative rule process that we were going to go forward with, and to outline the different considerations that we would have, such as the budget of the organization, the type of violation, whether just very technical in nature or something else.
Okay, but it just seems, it's just worded very strangely now, because it seems to only talk about repeated violations, and I don't
Okay.
think it would be hard to fix in
Okay.
the language.
Yeah, I don't think actually you need the words for repeated violations, because if it's up to 3,000, otherwise, as Commissioner Novick says, it looks like it's only for repeat.
I'm looking for the city attorney because that was actually advice that they gave. But I'm happy to look at that and see if we can do an amendment.
I mean, it sort of implies that there's a lower threshold for single violations, but
Right.
it doesn't say what the threshold is, so
Okay.
it's just confusing.
I think we can clarify that. Great, thank you. Okay, so the reason that we're doing this piece is to bring the penalties closer in line with other jurisdictions who have penalties for this type of law, and that would be Seattle, San Francisco, State of Oregon. They have $5,000 as their maximum penalty. So we think this amount allows the auditor's office to recover costs associated with the enforcement, including the ability to seek recovery of attorney's fees. So the next steps for the auditor's office would be to continue to focus on education and outreach regarding lobbying regulations. Our goal is to get the most disclosure as we can under the code. In particular, we'll be focusing the next 4 months, if these should pass, on increasing awareness of the program in general with targeted outreach to folks that would be subject to it. We're going to update public information, manuals, and increase the number and frequency of trainings. We'll also be creating administrative rules through an open process before the effective date. Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay,
I have a
I have some questions. Why don't you go ahead with yours and then
Thank
I'll
you.
ask a number
My
of questions.
first set is on the calendar postings.
Yes.
That's section 070D.
Yes.
It says that we're required to post calendars, and let me first say, I totally appreciate this whole project. I support the vast majority of it. I'm just trying to understand what the requirements would be and how I would do them. So it says that unless otherwise exempted, calendars required by this section shall include the date and length of scheduled official business. What's the purpose of saying that the length of the meeting is important?
Well, one of the requirements to register is that 8 hours threshold of lobbying. And if we can have some idea of the length of some of these meetings, that helps us with kind of letting lobbying entities know that they may be subject to this ordinance.
Okay, I have half-hour meetings if they end 10 minutes early or if they end 15 minutes late, and the lobbying entity enters it differently. Am I in violation if I say that it was 20 minutes when they say it was, or vice versa?
So I think it's how it's scheduled. We would want to see however you intended it to be. If it varied dramatically, perhaps that would be something to update on your calendar. But whatever it was scheduled as would be important for us to
And
know.
this is for all official business, so it's not just for lobbying meetings.
Correct.
I just-
However, we've narrowed that down so that there's an emphasis on outside meetings and that you wouldn't have to have the extra administrative burden of putting all this information for internal meetings with your staff.
I don't think it says that, so that's something else that I'd like to have clarified. And then the second part of that section says, if scheduled activities include non-city staff and are private, the primary participants or organizations shall be listed.
Yeah.
So does that mean if I have a birthday party, I have to list everybody who's at it?
Well, are you having the birthday party? I think the question would be as a part of your official business. That sounds like it might not be something you would include on an official calendar.
So activities that reflect official city business.
Mhm.
Okay.
I actually was looking at the same language, and I think that it's relatively clear, but it might make it a little clearer to say, if scheduled official business activities include non-city staff. Just repeat the phrase.
Yes, that would be helpful to me.
Okay.
And then the other clarifying question I have is about the 2 years instead of 1 year, and particularly about including at-will staff. You frame that as high-level officials, and in some, I consider all of my at-will staff high-level officials. I currently am employing somebody part-time for $15 an hour while she's in school and she's helping with our front desk and other activities. She would come under this category. One of my policies is to try to employ folks who are getting their start in public participation and public business, and I'm hoping that they're going to get offered fancy jobs in either the private sector or elsewhere. So I'm just troubled by that provision and wondered if you could talk about what's the purpose of that.
The purpose is to capture everyone who is involved in activities that your office may be discussing and to prevent the conflict that may happen and the appearance of undue influence after that person leaves office and then may have different levels of access than someone else.
Isn't that up to the elected officials to prevent that undue appearance of influence as opposed to the at-will employee, him or herself?
I think it's everyone's responsibility to watch out for the appearance of impropriety. I would also like
You
to.
consider at-will staff to be, I consider them to be public servants. What do you consider them to be?
Public servants.
Public servants. But public servants at the risk of going bad after
No, I
2
think
year-
that this
you know,
is.
that's why they need a 2-year timeout from future employment?
No, if you go back to my introductory remarks, this is about in keeping aligned with the Code of Ethics, where it lays out that we're supposed to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. And I think that the public trust, can the public, I mean, I don't think the public should have to understand what the intricate details of your relationships with your staff are, and I think that it's an appearance issue, that if it looks like the playing field is not level, that someone can come back in and essentially trade on information that they developed when they were public servants, then I think that is what chips away at the public trust.
Well, the current language does prohibit an employee from lobbying on an issue that he or she has had a substantial involvement in.
Right, and we're
I guess
saying, we're
I'm
suggesting
concerned.
that is very difficult to define. Is that they spent 3 hours on a topic or 100 hours on a topic? I mean, that's why we're trying to
Yeah,
clarify.
but you're
some of those
choosing
things.
sort of a blanket approach, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Commissioner Fritz. I'll be happy to cede my time back to you. But I think you are,
Let you both have at it for a while.
I think you're doing two things. One is you're penalizing people that have been loyal, hardworking public servants by saying for 2 years, you can't pursue any employment that is any remotely related to City Hall or
That
city
is not
government.
what it says.
And then secondly, you're going to make it very difficult to hire good, inspired people who maybe hope to have careers, either in the private sector or in the public sector, from ever wanting to go to work in City Hall.
And that's not what we're proposing. What
No,
we're-
but that's what I'm suggesting is the impact of this, which is why I'm
And
supporting keeping it
I
at
would
1 year.
respectfully disagree with you, Commissioner. What it prohibits is coming back to lobby. So there's all kinds of employment possibilities for talented public servants when they want to leave public service. And all we're saying is that one of the things that they should not be doing is coming back to lobby their former elected official or their former colleagues. And so it's a very narrowly tailored prohibition around lobbying, not employment.
Have you ever heard the phrase, "let knowledge serve the city"? That's PSU's motto.
Right.
I think there's something to be said for having people who understand the quirky form of Portland government, which is pretty unique. We're one of a handful of governments, one of one government left that has this quirky form of government. And I think,
Handful of one.
in my own opinion, I think it's useful to have people who understand and have gained experience through working in that system to help guide decision-making for the public, for their clients, for those of us who serve in office.
But Commissioner, let me come back and ask you for clarification from myself. I think that the 2 years is reasonable for the elected officials and the bureau directors.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're just talking about the at-will staff.
Right. I absolutely agree with the elected officials and the bureau directors.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned about the impact on at-will staff, in
So-
both attracting them and penalizing them for working as public servants.
So since I have a lot of questions, I am going to let Commissioner Fish go next, and then I'll take up my long list.
Well, I just want to strike while the air is hot here on the prior conversation you had with two of my colleagues on the calendar issue. So, Deborah, here's the context. We find that from time to time, there are discrepancies between the reports filed by lobbyists and our records. And I just want to just connect the dots on how this is constructed to make sure that we're all on the same page. Under the code, by the 15th of the end of each quarter, the lobbyist or lobbying entity is required to file their report.
Correct.
And that becomes a public record. There is a safe harbor provision in the code that gives city officials up to 25 days from the end of the close of the calendar to make any amendments without consequence. So the way we've interpreted this is that from the moment the lobbyist reports are filed, we have 10 days to do a quick scan to make sure that our records and the lobbyist records correspond. And the kinds of things that we often find is the wrong date is listed, or maybe the wrong time or something. I'm not trying to cast aspersions to the people filing, but these are human errors. And so as I understand it, there is that 10-day window to fix and to update a calendar or to make other changes if a discrepancy is identified. Is that correct?
That 10-day period applies for lobbying entities, for city officials who are required to post a calendar. That date is 15 days after the end of the quarter.
At the end of the quarter. So, so then that, I guess, frames the other question, which is, so the city official does his or her best to get it all right. But at the moment that the lobbyist report hits, a light goes off and says, boy, there's a problem here. It has to get sorted out. Somebody has got a error in how they've reported it. Can that be amended thereafter without consequence of fine or penalty by the city official?
I think that's something we could consider, sure.
Pardon me?
I think that's something we could consider.
Well, because my sense is, and my sense is that you in particular are very focused on just getting it right. And if people make good faith efforts, you want to get it right. And that sometimes there's just human errors in how things appear. This is pretty prescribed, but I also think there's a rule of reason. And we have found you problem-solving oriented. But I want to make sure that we're not handcuffing ourselves, because sometimes by the time when that lobbying report comes out, it's an additional tool to sort of verify. And we don't want to discourage people from doing that. Because sometimes you find that either you or the lobbying entity made a mistake and you correct it as we should. And I think at least from the city official side, it should be done within a reasonable period of time without a penalty.
So I think this proposal has big problems, and I don't intend to support it. And I want to go through some details of that and questions for you. But first, some disclosures, because it's important to disclose so that people don't ascribe motives that aren't real. First, I am not going to lobby the city of Portland after I am mayor in any way, shape, or form for any reasonable time period, probably for the rest of my life. So I will not be subject to the provisions that we're talking about. So let's get that out of the way right away. Secondly, I think I bring a unique perspective, without being immodest, to this discussion. From 1979 to 1991, I served as a paid lobbyist for two different business organizations. First, the Oregon State Lodging Association, and then the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland. I lobbied the Portland City Council, the Washington County Board of Commissioners, 23 other cities in the metro area, a couple of other counties in the state legislature. So I understand lobbying. And part of the perspective that I bring to this also is informed by any of us who goes to Salem, even today. There are hundreds of lobbyists active in the state legislative process. All subject to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission process, which is what we were subject to in the city, I believe, until what year did we establish our own separate lobbying regulations from the state?
2005.
What's that?
2005.
2005. So I served as a member of this council for 10 years while we were under the state regulations. I see no discernible difference by having our own regulations. I'm sorry that sounds threatening to you because it's your job, but I don't see any difference. The difference I do see, actually, is that there are a lot less lobbyists involved in city government now than there were 10 years ago. I mean, I've been really struck by that during this term of office. Where are all the lobbyists? There are maybe a half. There's one. There's one. On cue. Lynn, you couldn't have made a better entrance. So there literally are a half a dozen professional lobbyists who ever appear in these chambers. At least that appears to be the case, and I'll get to that a little later. In the interim between working as a lobbyist, serving as a city commissioner, and coming back here as mayor, I worked all over the country. Not as a lobbyist, although some newspapers have occasionally described me as promoting streetcars. I was actually a consultant to local governments who hired my company in a competitive process, and then we did engineering design for light rail and streetcar projects all over the country. But I got to see the political cultures of lots of other cities. And believe me, I saw self-dealing, I saw conflicts of interest, I saw really outrageous special interest influence, and I saw real corruption. Employees in my company wore a wire in one particular jurisdiction where they worked, and the FBI came in and arrested 24 people that worked for the Department of Transportation in that city. So let me tell you, I can tell you about real governmental corruption. And it ain't here. It's not in Oregon, and it's not in Portland. So I'm a little puzzled as to why the city in 2005 bothered to enact its own regulations versus following the Oregon Government Ethics Commission process, which requires forms and disclosures and dollar tabulations and all the rest of the stuff that we duplicate in our regulations. So we're getting to the heart of the matter, which is what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Frankly, I don't see one, not because I'm blind, but I would say because of that experience, I have a context that frankly you don't have, because I know I'm old enough that in 1979 you weren't doing this work. And again, I've had this context of working in places where there's real corruption, where people go to jail. In Miami-Dade County, at any given time, I think there's at least one elected official serving time. That's, by the way, where we wore the wires. You can look it up. So I'm being a little playful here, but I don't see the problem that we're trying to solve. But then I start seeing all kinds of side effects. So let's get out of generalities and get to some specifics, because law is about what's right and what's wrong. So let's get to real specific cases and let you give us some answers. Right now, okay, so the city works with lots of organizations, public, private, nonprofit. We can't make a distinction in this code about, well, it's okay to lobby for a nonprofit, right? We can't say that, I don't think. So we have to treat everybody alike. So Hacienda Community Development Corporation is currently in the process of hiring an executive director. Would it be right or wrong for a current city, under your proposed code, would it be right or wrong for a current City Hall staff member to seek that position? And wouldn't that put Hacienda Community Development Corporation in a terrible position of hiring someone to work with the city who was barred from working with the city? Would it be wrong for that City Hall staff person to take that job? It's a
No.
yes or no question.
No.
It would not be wrong.
No.
But it would be contrary to your code.
It-
So we got to work on that.
No, it would not be contrary to the code if they accepted a position. It would be contrary to the code.
Well, then they couldn't do the job.
Well, if their job is
Hacienda-
lobbying the city, then.
Hacienda CDC has lots of relationships with the city, which under our very broad definition of lobbying constitute lobbying, so they couldn't do the job.
Well,
so-
that's a different issue than whether or not they should take the job. So I'm saying this
Well,
code does
that's a
not.
distinction without any practical difference. They shouldn't hire somebody who couldn't do the work. So
Well, I
you're
would
s-
suggest if you're the executive director of a nonprofit organization, you have more responsibilities than lobbying.
So you're saying they should take the job, but reconfigure it so that they don't work with the city of Portland?
I would suggest that if they've just left your office and take that
Not
job.
my office, it could be anybody's office.
That they, under the proposed changes, then they would be prohibited from coming back to lobby their colleagues.
Okay, and therefore that it would be wrong, it would be foolish for Hacienda to hire such a person. Zari Santner, the former director of the Portland Parks Bureau, now, after leaving the Parks Bureau, began volunteering for the Parks Foundation on the Wildwood Bridge project, and served as a paid consultant to help a group plan a new urban design around the Moda Center. Would that be wrong? Would she be prohibited from doing that work?
Now or what?
She would,
like-
under your proposed ordinance, she would have to be interfacing with PDC and the Planning Bureau and PBOT and other agency, Parks Bureau, in order to plan the Wildwood Bridge project and in order to.
If she was acting as a lobbyist, she
What,
would be,
what constitutes acting as a lobbyist?
based on the definition in the code.
Right, so she would be talking with people in city government,
Yeah,
therefore
the
she would
city
be acting as a
government
lobbyist.
folks are fine. We're talking about the higher level decision makers. That's when it's considered lobbying.
So if she talked to anybody on the city council or a bureau director or a PDC
And was
commissioner.
attempting to influence official actions of the city.
Right, so she would be prohibited from doing that. That would be a loss. Zari has done a magnificent job on that, on those projects. The vision they've come up with for the Rose Quarter is wonderful. Ron Paul, my former chief of staff, left city government and became the executive director of the James Beard Public Market Foundation, seeking city funding and other partners for the construction of a public market. He would, I assume, not be eligible to do that if he were alive today and able to make that same decision under your proposal. And I assume you think that that is fundamentally wrong for Ron to have done that. Because legislation is about what's right and wrong. So I believe you're saying that all three of those scenarios would be wrong.
In that particular example, though, he had been out for more than enough time.
If he, yeah, okay, so if it was more than 2 years, but it wasn't more than 2 years.
Can I just clarify something? I just like to say, ethics laws, from what I have read and what I have seen being here, they're a lot about appearances. So it's not always about right and wrong, but a lot of times with government ethics, it's about appearances. And I think that may be the piece we're missing here.
Newspapers are about appearances. Law is about what's right and wrong. So I disagree with that completely, because the next subject is enforcement. So again, I mentioned I've had this long.
Could I, if you don't mind, could I respond to something you said
Sure,
in this section?
please.
When you were talking about that, there's not corruption here and there's not the terrible things that you've seen in other communities, how I would respond to that would be to say that these types of ethics codes and rules are about preventing those very things from happening. And when
Well, I don't agree,
Deborah
because
was
those things
going,
didn't happen before 2005 either here, because the political culture in Oregon is honorable, and we have a very high standard of public ethics.
Right.
We've had legislative scandals in the past over people accepting vacation time in a lobbyist's condominium in Hawaii. So, we have such a hair trigger when it comes to public ethics that, frankly, what's on the books in the city since 2005 hasn't made any difference that I can tell.
well, and I would say that I think the disclosure provisions of this code do make a difference about that.
Yeah, I completely disagree. So let's talk about enforcement. I've been mayor and serving as the presiding officer of this council for 3 years and change now. The current law says that prior to offering public testimony before city officials, at the beginning of any meetings or phone calls with city officials, or in emails and letters to city officials, a lobbyist must declare which lobbying entity he or she is authorized to represent for that commission. That's the law. This is a guesstimate, because I wasn't keeping track. I didn't know this was coming. But I've noticed that, actually, Mr. Bernstein's in the room. He's one of the few people that follows that law. I would guesstimate that maybe half a dozen times someone has actually disclosed that in this chamber. And I would guesstimate that 50 times there have been lobbyists in this chamber who didn't disclose. The auditor is the keeper of these records and the custodian of the moment-by-moment video of each of these council chambers. Have you sought violations against any of those folks who appeared here in the council chamber in the last 3.5 years who were lobbyists and who didn't disclose that they were lobbyists?
I certainly have.
And what was the result of those cases?
They were informed of the requirements, which is what we do when there are violations like that on a first case scenario. I spoke with the person and let them know about the regulations. Also, I'd just like to point out that,
But you haven't fined anybody, right?
no,
Because the behavior isn't improving.
right? But the exemption, one of the exemptions for lobbying is when you're in an open forum like city council. And so I think that is a little.
Prior to offering public testimony.
Yeah, but that one, I just want to point out that it is still public testimony in that case. So there is some level of openness to it. Is what I'm
Right,
saying.
but they're not disclosing. You're not finding them, and they're not getting any better at it. So we might want to try to make the code we have work before we.
Well, I
write
would
new code.
suggest that we do that, and when we see discrepancies, like I said at the beginning, that a lot of the code that we have and the program we have was developed to be a disclosure model, and that's why we count on you to do your calendars and the lobbyists to report, because that's how we match up to see, you are checking them, they are checking you. And that's how we do that. If you want something that is much more enforcement-oriented, with a lot more investigation.
No, quite the contrary.
Then that's not the model we have, and we would need the resources to do those things.
Well, but how are you going to carry out all this without more resources? And actually have it mean anything? Because the current disclosure obviously isn't meaning anything. They're not doing it. You're not fining them for not doing it. People in the audience aren't noticing that they're not
Well,
doing
in terms of fining, we never start out with a fine. We like Deborah said, she contacts them. Sometimes they don't know the requirement, so that they will register if they're, over the 8 hours. And so it's a very much a stepped-up process. We don't start out with a fine.
I
So
wouldn't
if you
even
have some
start out.
concerns about people appearing in the chamber, then I would hope that you would alert us to that concern, and then we would follow up.
Well,
on it.
again,
I've also
I wanna
spoken
go
with your
back-
office about this particular piece. I just want to let you know, I've spoken with your office about this particular piece and asked if that could be communicated, that particular rule could be communicated at the beginning of
I did
council.
that
And
for a
I think
while.
that's helpful.
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
that for a while. It didn't have any effect either. So, so again, I don't want to be too harsh here, but I think we have a body of law on the books that was largely unnecessary because the state Oregon Government Ethics Commission process was adequate to the task of making sure that professional lobbyists were properly disclosing their activities. Again, it's swimming against the tide, but I'm here to tell you, based on 40 years of experience with government, quite a bit of it here, that this is a solution in search of a problem. We are the cleanest place in America when it comes to politics here in the Northwest. I won't necessarily include California in that, but that's another story. But Oregon and Washington are the cleanest place in the United States for politics. We have a great system for public disclosure under Oregon law. Lobbyists are few and far between in this chamber. Again, Mr. Bergstein, it's nice to have you here, but it's very rare to have a paid lobbyist actually in the room. And we hire great people who work in city government for a while and then go do something else in the community. And everybody knows that this person working for, PCRI used to be on Dan's staff, or that person working for the Parks Foundation used to be on Amanda's staff. People know that. We take that into account, but it doesn't have undue influence. But what you're doing with this proposed rule, if we are weak-kneed enough to adopt it, is making it really difficult for good people to work here and then do anything else in Portland afterwards, and that would be a travesty. Because what Zeri did and has continued to do as a volunteer and as a paid person since she was Parks Director is simply wonderful. What Ron Paul did after he left my office, went to PDC, and then went on to be the Executive Director of the James Beard Public Market, is an amazing public service, and I don't want to stop people from doing that.
So Mayor, I have a couple of amendments to offer and before we take public testimony. I've been looking more at the calendar requirements, and I'm going with at the length thing. That's fine. If it's not clear under, this is section D, part 1 again, colleagues. It's for the date of and length of official business. I don't see where it says that that's for meetings other than those with city staff. So I'd like to add at the end of that sentence, except for meetings with city staff other than city officials, because I don't think you want me to list every time I'm meeting with my scheduler to go over my schedule. So that's the first part of that. And then to delete and/or private in the second sentence, if scheduled activities include non-city staff, I would like them to list the primary participants or organizations, whether they're so-called private or not.
Yeah, that was to get at, various public events that would be clear already.
Yeah, the public events, we're going to list that we were at, whatever event it was, and that would be the organization. So you certainly briefing me in my office, saying that as long as I'm listing the organization, I don't have to list everybody who's there. So that's my first amendment, is just to clarify that calendar requirement, which I think would make it a lot clearer. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you. I don't know whether we want to take this as a package. My second one was to delete section B under 12080, which is about the at-will staff. I have a little bit different opinion from the mayor in terms of bureau directors who are city officials. That can be really uncomfortable if they're in a different role soon after they've left city office. I think my main concern is the at-will staff within our offices who, as I said, I want them to be able to go on and do good things, and in some cases we'll want them to be able to go and give their expertise to the other offices. So I would suggest we leave the 2 years for city officials, including bureau directors, clarify that for contracts it's forever, but remove the at-will staff from this requirement.
Second.
Where does that appear? I'm sorry if I
Top
got
of
your
page
second.
5.
Top of page 5.
Oh, I see. It's the whole subsection B there. Okay,
I second that.
all right. Okay, you want,
Good,
any
good.
other proposals for amendments before we take public testimony?
Wait, I'm sorry, could I just make sure that you want to take out all of section B or just at-will staff out of that sentence?
It's only at-will staff is section B.
You'd remove the entire post-employment prohibition for at-will staff.
Correct, and that actually gets to your concern about what's substantially involved in. I don't think that the public interest is whether the person in my office spent 10 hours on something or 100 hours on something. It's probably a value that
I will just note that is weaker than what's currently in the code.
What's that?
I will just note that that is weaker than what's
I know,
currently in the code.
you raised it as something to be fixed. What is the
Right.
problem to be fixed is that what is substantially involved in. I see that there's a problem when city elected officials or bureau directors come and lobby. I don't see it as a problem when folks who may have had may have had any kind of involvement.
Colleagues,
Lower than that.
I know we want to get to public testimony, but that leads me to a conversation I wanted to have with the auditor's office, which is on this issue. I mean, the mayor's right. We traditionally have a squeaky clean ethics record in Oregon, or actually more specifically, we appear to have an unwritten rule that all scandals involve sex, they never involve money. But that is an unwritten rule. It's not a written rule, and we could conceivably someday in Oregon have a scandal that involves money. But that leads me to my main point, which is
This doesn't
I think-
regulate sex.
What?
This doesn't regulate sex.
Right, yeah. But I think that in terms of public perception of corruption, what the public is normally concerned about is people making a lot of money off their former public position. And if somebody left city employment and went to work as a highly paid lobbyist for a big business that does business in the city and makes a lot of money off it, I think people might certainly raise some eyebrows. But if somebody came to work at the city because they're interested in homeless issues, and then they got a job at the county working on homeless issues, and occasionally they were lobbying the city on how to address homeless issues, I don't think the public would be upset about that at all. So I think that it's worth having a discussion about drawing distinctions between going off and taking jobs, making a lot of money, and then going off and taking jobs for nonprofits and other governments. Although I have to say that after reading Nigel Jacobs's piece on hospitals today, maybe one might want to distinguish between nonprofits and only address those that are really nonprofit. But I just wanted to ask you for your thoughts on that general, philosophical question. Isn't what people are really worried about, people going off and making lots of money off their government service?
Well, so one thing is that some jurisdictions have a waiver process that allows for an open determination of whether the city's best interest would be served by a waiver to the prohibition. And that is a potential that we could add in. San Francisco has that, and they've had maybe one waiver per year.
But they don't exempt work for other governments or for nonprofits?
I believe they do exempt work for other governments. I don't believe nonprofits are exempted, although I'd have to take a look.
Deborah, can I come back to something that you said earlier? Because we've had two amendments offered for which we don't currently have the draft language, so I'm trying to just
We have the
track.
draft language for one because it's a deletion, but yes.
The deletion.
Well, it's a deletion that has a further complication, so that's why I'm asking. That if we delete B at page 5, then you said earlier, then we're actually diluting the existing prohibition, because as I read A at the bottom of page 4, there is an existing prohibition for a period of time of a former at-will employee lobbying his or her former boss. So my chief of staff under this could not leave and come back and lobby me tomorrow, correct?
Currently, under something they were personally substantially involved in, they couldn't do that.
And if we simply delete B at the top of page 5, we're not just eliminating a proposal that you've made in your judgment to strengthen the code. As you said, we're actually weakening the code off of the existing prohibition.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, but they've said that that's not really enforceable. And you haven't had a case, right?
Based on the definition of, personally and substantially involved, that is what, it takes a lot of back and forth and judgment on our part, and we're saying that we could make it clear for the employees who fall under this code if we clarified that language and didn't get into, was it 50%, was it 60%, was it 2% of some topic that came up.
Right. And, yeah, but your proposed solution was at all. And
Correct.
I understand the reasoning behind Commissioner Fritz's amendment.
Well,
Other
I think,
suggestions for amendments before we proceed? Or
I mean, subsection A only deals with us elected officials, right?
No, it
No.
originally
No.
dealt with or other employee.
And they're at-will
They
staff.
struck that in order to create that.
Oh,
in.
okay.
So if you
It was for all city staff.
eliminate this, then this is modified as part of the proposal, so you actually go backwards.
So you're right, Commissioner, and now I understand the auditor's question to me. So we're actually just striking no former at-will. That does need to be further amended. It seems to me that we might need to
Well, we're not
carry
gonna
this
get this
over.
done
We're not
today,
going to get
so-
this, so I'll work on that with you. And we also need, and I do move the auditor's amendment to strike F from
Second.
080.
So my suggestion is we leave all these amendments on the table, because we're gonna get
Yeah.
testimony. This is gonna need more work, obviously, if it proceeds. So,
And Mayor, can I just say that, and I appreciate that, because the way, we have a red line copy, Commissioner Fritz has asked that we do red line copies whenever the thing, and it actually makes it a lot easier for all of us to follow, so thank you for doing that. But the challenge is, if you strike one thing, it's delicately balanced, and you're actually modifying another section to correspond, and we can have a vigorous debate as a council whether we want to approve or not any of these provisions. I want to make sure there's no unintended consequences of an amendment. And so I think, and I appreciate Commissioner Fritz suggesting that we reduce these to writing, cross-reference them, and make sure that we know exactly what's on the table, and then we can debate it.
yeah, we might also want to involve some folks other than this little bubble of elected officials. So did you have a task force working with you from the community, or?
Well, we did outreach to various ethics organizations, and we consulted some, so I have here who I spoke with. I did outreach to neighborhood coalitions, the League of Women Voters, the Center for Public Service, Tom McCall Center for Public Innovation, the City Ethics Group, and others.
Did you do any outreach to at-will employees in the
We did
building?
have a meeting with city, your executive staff, absolutely.
Executives.
I might suggest that downstream here, we might want to involve some of those groups and maybe some others, like the ACLU, because people that work here have rights, in maybe some kind of a further task force effort that gets beyond, again, the closed conversation of a few of us in this building. So it might be something worth pursuing.
And these also were distributed for general public comment as well, so we did our best to advertise that we were making these changes. And
Lobbyists also provided feedback.
Okay, other questions? All right, thank you very much. You have some invited testimony, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. So let's invite them. I don't know who they are, so you'll have to invite them. I'm sorry.
Hi, good afternoon.
Noon.
My name is Dr. Sana Raikov. I am an adjunct assistant professor at Portland State University and at the University of Oregon here in Portland. And I specialize in political science with an emphasis on American political behavior and psychology and trust in government. I'm here to just provide my expertise on the topic and not to give any opinion about what you should do with the proposal. Try to be neutral and objective with regard to this matter. So research shows that there are, like, by and large, three main concerns when we are talking about revolving door lobbying, because that's what we're generally calling this matter of public officials getting a lobbying job after they leave office. And the first of those concerns regards career concerns in the lobbying industry that they may affect government decision-making. So, for instance, if elected officials are worried about their career after their term is over, and after, I'm sorry, I'm mixing 2 points now. Let me get back and go back to the first point. So the first concern is raised with regard to career concerns in the lobbying industry that may affect government decision-making. So lobbyists may be concerned about their own career and about their own existence that may affect government decision-making. Another concern that comes up in the research is the prospect of post-governmental careers and the potential financial windfall of that. That can change the type of person who runs for office. So if officers or government officials are worried about what they may do after they're leaving their office, it can actually influence the people that are deciding to run for office in the first place. And then the third concern that shows up in the research is maybe the one that's most applicable here. And those are concerns regarding any disparity or access and influence over elected representatives create ethical issues or may create ethical issues, and perpetuates the impression that government is controlled by a tightly knit elite. That's when we come to talk about citizens' perceptions and citizens' public trust in government. Whether these concerns or whether the concerns about revolving door lobbying are actually outcomes of any process, or whether they are actually present here at the local government level, doesn't really matter for the public. It's about the perception that they may be, and it is about the perception that they're therefore possible. Often these concerns with regard to revolving door lobbying undermine public and popular support for democratic institutions. Citizens perceive and believe that public officials are sort of cashing in on their government experience, and they shouldn't be doing that. So the appearance of undue influence itself casts aspersions on the integrity of government. This is why most governmental agencies and why the state of Oregon also has this ethics provision and has some sort of policy regarding revolving door lobbying. Furthermore, research on public trust shows that trust in government is decreasing. This is not a new finding. We hear it in the media like daily. We know that overall, in comparison to the federal government, local government does fairly well, but ratings of public trust are still dropping. When we ask people what their biggest concerns are these perceptions of conflicts of interest and the perception that other elected officials are not serving their best interest, but are actually serving special interests. Again, whether this is true or not doesn't seem to matter, because once people perceive that this is true, it's difficult to convince them otherwise. So values such as integrity, purpose, and also effectiveness are especially important to citizens. So why is this important? Well, as a scholar researching trust in politics and trust in government, we can kind of give several reasons for why trust in government is important, and they're very obvious. We need trust from citizens to have a working democracy. Citizens need to participate in democracy, but also we know that trust increases cooperation between the government and the public, so we can actually create better policy and create better outcomes for the larger society. Citizens overall want to be a part of local government, and they want to be heard, and they want to give their voice. So often, like meetings like this are perfect opportunities for citizens to actually talk with their elected officials and let them know what they like to see. Unfortunately, many citizens develop slightly negative orientations about the local government. These negative experiences outweigh positive experience. The positive experience are viewed as this is normal business. We pay our taxes, the government should provide for these things, and yeah, it's great that this worked out positively, but that's sort of the normal way of business. They tend to remember the negative experiences, and especially when those experiences harm public trust, it's really hard to get away from that, and the trust may be harmed permanently. So luckily, scholars have also come up with certain strategies to provide local governments and other government officials to include so that the citizens' questions to their government or citizens' doubt towards government are limited, and the relationship with government are actually improved. So 3 of those strategies are reaching out to citizens, show them what the government does, show them how it ensures to serve the interest of all citizens and not just special interests, show citizens that they are being heard. The second strategy is listen to citizens in decision-making and providing opportunities to make their voices heard, not just in council meetings or in public hearings, but also in surveys and in focus groups, invite them to meetings. Often this is done and citizens don't answer, but it's also up to the local government to really try to invite and include citizens in that process. And then the third is maybe the hardest one to do. It's perform well, right? Don't make any mistakes and avoid any perceptions of conflict of interest. So even though the government can perform really well, citizens may take that as for granted, as this is what the government is supposed to do, but avoid any perceptions of conflict of interest to make sure that the citizens really see that the government has their best interest at heart. And also communicate those good performances to citizens. Of course, these strategies are not solving any problems with public trust, and we cannot have a 100% public trust rate. But they do help. They do help with the confidence of citizens in government, and they do help with perceptions. So much in politics happens without public attention. So much happens in committee hearings, in decision-making that is not directly available to the public, or the public doesn't pay attention to it from themselves. And the public does pay attention when something seems to be going wrong or something is going wrong. The topic of lobbying is one of those that kind of takes place behind doors for many citizens, and that's why they're fairly skeptical of it. So reducing any perception of potential conflict of interest or potentially serving special interest would always be a good way to go. Lobbyists are providing valuable information and expertise to the government, and I think maybe that would be something that the government should focus on more in communicating with its citizens, instead of really just trying to keep this interaction closed and behind doors. When I was listening to the previous conversations, there was a comment made about citizens are afraid that politicians are making big money or that they're cashing in on their experience, and that's indeed one of those main fears of citizens. They are afraid that they're kind of helping through a sort of legal system to create this elite decision-making model, and often staffers are viewed as the extension of elected officials. It's hard for citizens to kind of distinguish between this is my official that I elected in this seat and the group that supports that official throughout all the years is really a different part of it. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of a summary on the matter on this topic and like where current research stands, and that it is really about the perception instead of the actual outcomes or actual results for that. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have
Well, thank you
them.
for yours. Just first, your testimony provoked a comment, and then I do have a suggestion, or at least a query about a topic or two to research here, because this combination of psychology and public policy is very interesting. First, the comment is that, last night we had a public budget forum. There are 18 people in the chambers now. There were 300 there. There were no paid lobbyists, and the room was suffused with I don't believe there was any press, although there's press here now. David Ashton was there. Yeah. The room was suffused with a feeling that people had their say. And it was, I think all of us felt like the second of our 2 public budget forums, that we really have an open and accessible process in which, in this case, a lot of young soccer players got to come in and advocate for their soccer program in the Parks Bureau, and a lot of parents of kids that go to preschools at city community centers got to come in and advocate for that. And again, don't take my gloss on it. Go look up the tape and watch the 3 hours. But my perception was that was genuine democracy, uninfluenced by special interests, and with an elected body genuinely listening to their citizens. Sounds like self-praise. Take it at that as you want, or go watch the video and reach your own opinion. But it contrasts sharply with this proceeding in which we are purporting to talk about the public, but only a handful are here. Now, here's my question. I think there are a couple of areas in public policy, and it would be interesting if you or someone else could research this, where essentially because of the fear of looking bad, elected officials are wary of stopping the march. One is ethics legislation, which we're talking about, and the other is security. That there's this relentless march of always more security. Well, we have to have metal detectors now in our city buildings, and there never comes the day when the security professional says to the elected official, it's a safer world. You can take some of that junk out of here. And so when I arrived as mayor, I had to make the decision, or I chose to make the decision, it's okay. We don't need those stupid flippers on the ground floor of City Hall and someone asking which office you're going to in order to be safe. We can do something else. But someone had to take the political risk of swimming against the tide, and I'll celebrate that I did that. It's still a little controversy on this council, but I think it was the right thing to do. It restored this to being a public building. But there would never be a day when a police chief or a security professional, who after all is on the payroll to provide security, would say, Mayor, it's a safer world. You don't need that junk. Get it out of here. Well, it's kind of the same thing with ethics. There will never come a day when an ethics regulator comes to a public official and says, we didn't really need to duplicate the state code, and we don't really need all this code. It was working fine. You can go back to a less regulated environment. So I think it's an interesting problem for those who study government. If it's a one-way street, how do you ever get back to balance?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I'm able to answer it entirely. I think that's indeed a political risk that a politician takes. I'm sure that for an elected official, like all of you are, the public perception it just works really hard in favor of you or against you. And if you're, from the security perspective, it's almost a political suicide to say, now I'm not tough on crime, because everybody is expected to be tough on crime. I'm not saying that somebody is soft on crime, but saying, well, we're doing what we should be doing, and it's okay like this. Like I mentioned, I'm not here to plead in favor of the proposal or plead against it. I'm here to raise awareness about that public perception, awareness of potential conflict of interest. And I think if the city council could make convincing and persuasive argument that what is currently provided is sufficient, then it is at that point indeed the political risk that you take, whether citizens perceive that that's the case or not.
But don't you think I think the mayor's point was there's people who it's never going to be sufficient for, that it's always going to be, you got to do more, with all due respect to our election officer, she went to a conference, probably a taxpayer-paid conference, heard about best practices, what other cities are doing, and Portland's very competitive. We like to be on the top of the heap, so therefore we come back and suddenly we have some new recommendations. It's time to update our ethics law. Whereas I think the mayor was pointing out, the 2005 law seems to be working pretty well. So I guess that's the point he's trying to make, is there's never going to be a sufficiency in certain people's eyes.
But we are put in a position of being against ethics, just like we would be against security.
Right,
And so politically, that's very difficult for elected officials.
right,
It's an emperor's new clothes problem.
right.
But
Yeah,
I would say, though, in fairness, I know we're having with this, at some point in this debate, you're going to give us college credit for this, but I do think we are at risk here of leaving some important things out, which is, it's precisely because we typically have so few people in this chambers, and the people that are here are generally so unrepresentative of the city we serve, that we hear from people in the community that they want to see more sunshine. Because sunshine is the way that they have confidence in tracking what we do, because we disclose things. I frankly haven't, the lobbying rules may or may not be a success, but I don't often hear from lobbyists complaining about it. The safe harbor provisions actually exclude a lot of the groups because of the 8-hour rule, that for whom this would be burdensome. So I come at this a little differently. I think sunshine is intrinsically a good thing. And I think the more transparent we are, the more confidence people generally have in our work. How we talk about that, to the mayor's point, is important, because I too bristle at the idea that ever since Amanda, Steve, Dan, you and I got elected, somehow our character became less worthy. My experience in government is very high standards of character and ethics generally. But I think that this idea of doing our business in the sunshine in a very transparent way, as a way of, depending on your point of view, building or maintaining public trust, is a very important thing. And it's not just me saying this, it's the reason that there are all these wonderful public interest groups around the country representing grassroots people fighting for it. I would actually argue, in fact, that I hope we have this same debate, although even go deeper, if in some point in the future there's a desire to bring back a discussion about public financing of campaigns. Because frankly, I have often felt that the language we use there, Charlie, is even more pernicious. Yeah. And I'm a big believer in transparency and contributions, and I would love to see Citizens United overturned, and I'd like to see stricter contribution limits. But the idea that at some point, the last time we debated public finance here, the provision was called clean money, which inherently suggested that the money that a lot of my friends take is less than clean. And I think we have to be careful about how we frame these things, because there may be a public interest in moving in a particular direction, but I don't think that we necessarily have to establish base corruption as the point of departure for having those discussions. And so, and I know we wouldn't do that if we were discussing public finance. I hope we can also in this context recognize that there are some inherent goods that we hear from ordinary people who are not generally here because they're working, or they can't hire Steve Janik, or they don't have a lobbyist or whatever, where they feel more connected to their government because we make this extra effort to be transparent. And frankly, I even think that appearance standard is an important standard, because I know how high the ethics are of my colleagues. And I know that people try to follow the letter and the appearance, and I think it inherently reaps dividends in building and maintaining public trust.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Questions?
I just have to get on this. I appreciate your saying that you're not going to restore trust in government simply by passing more ethics laws, because
Right.
I mean, I've done something of a study of the history of trust in government, and trust in government was at an all-time high in 1964 when we didn't have many ethics laws or government of the sunshine laws, but we had 20 years of uninterrupted shared prosperity, and people would remember beating the Nazis. And now we've had middle-class income stagnating since 1973, and we've got more ethics laws, but people don't trust government. And I suspect that unless we do something about income inequality, we'll continue to see lack of trust in government, and rightly so. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't pass strong ethics laws, but I'm sure, it sounds like you agree that that's not the only thing we need to do.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Like context always matters as well. And we see public trust go down even like in minor fluctuations when the economic circumstances are bad, or even when usually even in an election year, because there's so much more attention actually and focus on the government. So yeah, no, public trust is not only based on the integrity of the government, it's based on so many other variables.
I think
Really,
it's,
trust goes down in election years?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I didn't know that. Makes sense though.
Steve, this is the exception during your campaign.
I'm not so sure about that.
But I think one of the things that we also need to acknowledge is that a precipitous decline in civic literacy is at the root of a lot of these challenges. And, you know, the last poll that was done in Oregon, where 50% of the respondents didn't answer correctly the question, how many U.S. senators do we have, that a lot of people couldn't name them. It does seem to me that as we have declining civic literacy, in part because we're not teaching civics correctly, in part because we have sometimes the mainstream media doesn't really cover local events in a way that would give people meaningful information, that as civic literacy declines, it's not surprising to me that trust also declines, because I think you have to first have a baseline of understanding in order to make certain judgments. And I think those of us who've been on the ballot know that as people become less familiar with what we do, it's easier to disparage what we do because there's no baseline of sort of established norms about talking about what we do. Which is sort of, whatever myth has enough money behind it can actually make a dent. I will say around trust that going through the worst recession in our lifetime, the cities, after getting pounded with a recession, we still, according to the auditor's survey, are about 50% in terms of public satisfaction with what we do, which when you consider where Congress is a minor miracle. It's actually a minor miracle that we are at about a 50% rate.
Thanks again. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. Are
Thank
there
you.
other invited speakers, or should we turn right to the sign-up sheet, or come on up, please?
We'll be breaking for dinner in about half an hour and coming back for the second round
On
of
that kind of day. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland, something I say every time I come up here because I know the rules.
You do. You are the exception that proves them.
So the League was an early supporter of the city's lobbyist registration program, and along with other good government and public interest organizations, assisted Commissioner Sam Adams during the development process. As with any city program, regular evaluation and updates increase effectiveness and address changing circumstances. The League is pleased to support Auditor Hall Caballero's proposed improvements. From the beginning, there was a desire to set a reporting threshold that would capture the activities of not only nonprofit volunteer organizations like the League and City Club and associations such as the PBA, but also other highly influential lobbyists operating in City Hall. The hourly threshold was reduced from 16 to 8 hours in 2007 for that purpose. Instituting the financial threshold is a welcome addition, and we encourage the Auditor's Office to monitor its effectiveness over time and take additional steps if necessary. The broadened scope and length of the prohibition on former city employees' ability to lobby will help improve the public's confidence in the integrity of our city government. There should be a clear line between public service and private interests, and this provision is a big step in the right direction. The increased financial penalties for violations are appropriate given the fact that they have not been adjusted since 2005 and do not cover the cost of enforcement. It is reassuring to know, however, that the Auditor's Office will write administrative rules that describe the factors she will consider when setting fines for violators. A $3,000 fine for an all-volunteer organization like the League would have a much greater impact than a fine of that size on a large corporation. Then I just want to address a little bit about the conversation that's been going on. We recognize that Oregon and Portland are not, hotbeds of corruption and criminality, But even in spite of that fact, I think it's important for the public to know, what's going on behind closed doors. And that, to me, is one of the things that this lobby program does. I also, to talk about the higher level city officials being prohibited from lobbying for 2 years, when I look at those lobby reports and see the name of somebody who used to have a job in City Hall, I think that person probably has a lot easier access to coming to speak to you or your staffs than ordinary citizens or even representatives of volunteer organizations like the League. And, I don't know, it's not terrible or anything. It just feels like that's something that sort of undermines people's feelings about how decisions are being made. And that's why I think it is important to really think carefully. I mean, maybe that you want to think of some adjustments to do some sort of a lesser prohibition on at-will city council staff. Maybe not the chief of staff, but maybe down to the next step down. But I do think that a 2-year prohibition seems fair. And I think in the case of Zeri, if she was working as a volunteer on that project, this new provision wouldn't apply. But you'd have to double check with auditor about that. So,
But what if it had been paid?
no, I agree. On the page, she'd be, that she wouldn't be able to do it.
Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, although if she's just working with city staff, my sense is that's not lobbying. If she was helping design some sort of a new thing around the Rose Garden, I guess I could be understanding this completely wrong, but my sense is she isn't coming to you and saying, I want to do this. She's working with Parks Bureau staff to help think about how.
They make presentation to the planning commission, so. But take Ron Paul's example.
I don't think that counts as lobbying.
Ron Paul worked for me, worked for PDC, then went to work for the James Beard Public Market Foundation, seeking city funds. He was
Yeah.
never shy about it.
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely
And,
realize that.
I wasn't here to lobby, but there were
Right.
other people here to lobby.
But it's just 2 years. 2 years, that's
Okay,
it.
but you're
yeah.
saying he he should not have done that.
He may not have done it for 2
But You're
years.
saying he should not do, if that scenario were recreated today,
Yeah.
that would be wrong.
I think a 2-year cooling off period is fair, and then he can do it all he wants. And he does do it. He did do an excellent job at it. I saw him many times presenting about the public market, but a 2-year prohibition seems like a fair amount of time.
And are you concerned that we would lose a lot? I am, in terms of people being willing to serve on staff here, and what we would gain from a Ron Paul doing what he did in the city after he left city service, or what Zeri's done in the city, or, Mike Lindbergh. The only elected official that I can think of from the city council in our lifetime who has engaged in any kind of lobbying since he left the council. Jim Francisconi as well. So fairly rare instances, but
Yeah.
frankly, in my case, in my view, they're all positive. Of course, it's understood in public that they used to be an official here. So I'm very worried about what we lose in the effort to appear to be pure.
But again, as the professor talked about, appearance is also important.
But isn't the transparency what we're after?
Well, that too, I do, but I think this cooling off period is also important. No, I agree with you. The transparency to me is the most important thing. That's what we really, we really need to know, right? Yeah.
So why do you perpetuate with your choice of words behind closed doors? What do you mean by that?
Well, because the meetings are, I engage in meetings behind closed doors with you, but we report them. So that's what I'm saying is I think the lobbying program
We report every meeting we have.
So do I, yeah.
Yeah, so why do you say,
I'm saying the
you use
meeting-
the phrase that contributes to the low esteem held by elected officials by using that phrase behind closed doors? The insinuation is, we don't meet with the public, we only meet with lobbyists. And that's not true. Have you ever not been able to get a meeting with any one of us? No.
It depends, right, yeah.
No, I think the answer is no. And the point is, we all have open door policies. Anybody who wants to meet with us can meet with us. All they have to do is request a meeting. I'm sure that I speak for all 5 of us in that regard.
Yeah, again, were you there last night? I didn't see you.
No, I
Yeah, I
didn't.
mean, the contrast with last night is just breathtaking.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah, no, I mean, I have been to to big public meetings like that, it's wonderful.
Debbie, can I throw you a little softball?
Yes, go ahead.
The mayor has, I think, raised a couple of excellent examples, and by the way, every time you mention Ron Paul's name, I hope we soon have a conversation about how to truly honor his legacy.
Amen.
And before your term's over, Mayor, because you have been a champion for that. Do you draw a distinction between someone like Ron Paul, who goes out and leads a quasi-public spirited effort to build a public market, and whether he went to work for Exxon and came back trying to undermine our climate action plan or something? I'm just making it up, but if there was a waiver provision or a distinction to be made, do you draw a distinction between those two paths?
That certainly makes sense, yeah, it's definitely worth exploring that kind of option. I don't want to say for sure I know the answer to
Charles,
that.
the mayor has mentioned a couple of examples of things which I think instinctively sound like advancing the public interest around a park or a market.
Yeah.
Which to me, I'm not drafting an amendment here, but do seem to me qualitatively different than using where we're likely to be quite underpaid, if at all.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of a guiding. There's a city interest and a public benefit here, which is different from just purely mercenary work.
Well, and I didn't just pick those for effect. I mean, again, you work in Salem too. I mean, Salem is full of lobbyists working for corporations. We hardly ever see one, right? We see lobbyists working for community development corporations like REACH or NEA. They have to describe themselves as lobbyists, right? Those are the lobbyists that we see. And I didn't just pick those examples because I didn't want to talk about all the city staff members who went out to work for Exxon. I can't think of anybody. This is Portland.
I know.
Everybody goes to work for a nonprofit.
Absolutely.
So I just can't think of the pernicious scenario. And the trouble with issues like this, whether it's security or this, is that, or term limits, if I may make a really strange comparison. But we get mad at Congress and we enact local law.
Yeah.
Because we can't change Congress. Congress is a swamp. There's a place that needs more ethics legislation and term limits too, right? But they have neither.
Charlie, I'm proposing amendment. I'm opposing term limits for this body. That's
The league agrees with you.
concerned about the next shoe dropping. I'm going to move that.
Well, I definitely think that there's, I think if I heard right, you're thinking that you'll continue this conversation. I do think that those kinds of things should be considered. Is this person going out and helping a nonprofit or working for a nonprofit on something? Maybe there's a way to make distinctions on the revolving door policy. So,
And Debbie, I just wanted to let you know that most of my staff have confided to me that their real ambition is to go to work for the League of Women Voters, lobbying for ethics reform, and I would hate to deprive them of that opportunity.
We're volunteers, though, remember?
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you. Others that are invited, or then do we want to turn to the sign-up sheet? Go ahead, please.
Okay, I showed 3 others, David Delk, Kate Titus, and Craig Rogers.
Come on up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I don't think you're first. I think you're third, but I think she's next.
One. Good afternoon, Mayor Hales and Commissioners. Thank you for staying so late for this testimony and for all the work that you're doing. I'm Kate Titus, and I'm here representing Common Cause. I'm the Executive Director of the Common Cause Oregon chapter. And I've submitted written testimony, which you'll get copies of, basically expressing our support for the measures. Rather than go over that right now, I want to comment on what's being said because I think that's more relevant hearing the comments on the floor. And one thing I'd like to say is just listening to lobbyists like myself or people in a public service elected official role like yourselves.
I'm sorry, did you need to disclose?
She did.
Okay.
That's not the reason for my comment, though, but listening to any of us in these roles speak about ethics rules is a little bit like listening to white people talk about racism. And not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, I'll just speak to my own experience. I am white, and I think of myself as a good person, and I don't intend racism. And it's also, since I am not the brunt of most racism, it's easy for me not to see it and believe it doesn't exist. so when I talk about racism, it's very easy for me to write it off. And I think we have to be careful that all of us in the role of lobbyists and public officials recognize that our scope of understanding the ethics issue is somewhat limited, and not to assume that our own individual experience with it and opinion is really representative of what the broader public that we are accountable to sees and experiences. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of ethics rules that's come up in the conversation. This is not primarily about us setting rules to deal with the bad guys. It does that, prevents corruption of bad guys, but first and foremost, we're actually talking about setting clear guidance for the many good guys, like hopefully all of ourselves, who go into public service wanting to be accountable to the public. I think the nature of this is that we're not talking about just preventing our own self-interest and going astray. The reality is we are all facing many conflicted interests daily, and it's other people's interests of us. We may all have the very best intentions, but the reality is we have to navigate multiple interests all the time in the roles that we're playing. And so there needs to be clear guidance of how to navigate those roles to ensure the public trust, uphold the public trust, and many people have raised that up, that it's as much the appearance as anything, but also to ensure that our own actions are putting the public interest first. And I know we all like to think that that's what we're doing at every moment, because that's what we're intending to do. But if you talk for 5 minutes with any social psychologist, you know that there's a level at which we're all influenced by various incentives unintentionally and below our even conscious awareness. So we don't even understand often the ways that we are being influenced. That's the purpose of ethics rules primarily. So it's not impugning anyone, and I don't think anybody needs to be defensive, but we need to have clear guidelines, and I think it's really great that the auditor's office has taken the initiative to update and continue to keep our ethics rules strong. The one last point I'll just highlight, and this is in my written testimony, but best practice around that cooling off period or revolving doors is when there's any substantial personal involvement in an issue, actually you never, again, you've given up your right to then lobby on the private side and the public side of that interest. 2 years for other things and most officials is considered standard good practice. You will see 1 year many times, but it's often considered a little too superficial and cosmetic. So what the auditor is proposing is in line with best practice around the country in terms of 2 years. And I know that there is a tension. It can drive away good talent and make it difficult. I appreciate the challenge that all of us face in sometimes having to limit ourselves or our staffs from taking other roles. But the reality is, it's not about any of us individually, Ron Paul, yourself, myself. We have no entitlement to professional advances. If we choose to go in and represent the public, then what becomes uppermost is we set up systems that ensure that the public accountability to the public interest is always first. That's our intention, of course, going into it, but we have to make sure that there are guidelines for navigating those many inevitable conflicts of interest. So those are my comments.
Good, thank you.
Craig Rogers, Portland citizen. I support this proposal, and the reason why I'm speaking was because I did hear the remark of alluding to perhaps things were squeaky clean in this city and in this state. Nonetheless, a year ago, our Governor Kate Brown emphasized transparent and accountable. I believe that was in part in reaction to who she was replacing, because the Kitzhaber administration, the last administration, was not necessarily transparent and accountable. And a local example is with the parking meters, and I believe the FBI was involved with that. That's probably something that whoever was involved with that didn't really want it out there. And an example that I was involved with was the basis numbers during the street fee that actually some of my colleagues had to go to court to get that basis number, and I believe that when they got that number, it was wrong, and it showed that actually the biggest employer in the city of Portland was a colonics clinic with 32,000 employees. So I think that transparent and accountable is important, and I really support the intentions of this. Myself, I've been in leadership roles with Coca-Cola and the Teamsters Union, and there were certain guidelines that I had to abide by, and not only did I represent the members and employees better, but they made me a better person.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Watchdog PDX. One of the concerns I heard is that from the elected officials and the directors, I myself, in my opinion, think the staff also needs to have the 2-year and or more limit placed on them. And the reason why I say that is that what I don't want to see is that if you have an aggressive lobbyist company and they understand the importance of having that inside information if they can possibly get that advantage. And what I don't want to see is a company making offers to potential staff that are currently working for the city with the statement of, we can hire you maybe in 1 to 2 years when you're done working here. And also in a way making that staff individual feel like, well, maybe I can show them why you might want to hire me. So I want to have a cutoff point made very clear that when you're a public servant, don't expect to go work for that, become a lobbyist immediately. It's not going to happen. Don't expect offers to be made prior to you leaving City Hall. And it's the same thing I have a problem here too, is that let's talk a city attorney that's worked for the city for many years. Where do they fit into this equation if they leave and go to and become a lobbyist? I mean, of all the people that I would have the most concern of any information on city business would be through the attorneys, because they know what's going on at this city. They understand the details of it. They understand certain problems. They are the ones that I would be watching very close to possibly ever becoming a lobbyist based upon their knowledge of what goes on at this city. So I have a lot of mixed feelings on this, and I heard the mayor, if I was correct, say that I don't ever want to be a lobbyist when I leave here.
You heard that correctly.
So, but when you do make that statement, then what would be the concern about having a 2-year cooling off period for everybody at the city? Because you don't want to be a lobbyist, but there is a concern for the public to look at this and say, they have a lot of information. I don't necessarily want them to just go to become a lobbyist to begin to influence policy. I want to have the same advantage. I want to have the public from the special interest to the general interest. And this lobbyist issue is a big concern to me.
Right, because the difference, Lighting, under our code
Yes.
is that you become a lobbyist not when you go buy an expensive suit and show up on the 15th floor of an office building down the street with gold letter on the front.
Right.
You become a lobbyist if you become the head of a local nonprofit that works with the Parks Bureau or with any other city bureau on providing public services. You are a lobbyist under our code if you do a lot of things, not
Yes.
just work as a paid lobbyist for clients.
And at that point, what I'm saying is that the lobbyists currently out there that have the true knowledge of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to get certain things done are the ones that are going to focus on the most knowledgeable people at the city to try to have them work alongside them, or special interest groups that they want to ensure that they can have maybe possibly some influence. And that's a big concern to me on not having something set into place. And in my opinion, Mayor, I'll say this, is you made a statement, I don't ever want to be a lobbyist when I leave City Hall. In my opinion, any elected official and the mayor should never become a lobbyist. Under the definition of lobbyist, which I do agree, there's a lot more interpretation on that and understanding on what that truly means by this ordinance.
Yeah, the trouble is we use that word, which applies to professionals.
Right.
So Maggie Talmadge, who works for the Coalition of Communities of Color, also serves on our Planning and Sustainability Commission. Is she a lobbyist when she shows up on behalf of the Coalition of Communities of Color? She's paid, she's on their staff, she's meeting with city officials on subjects of equity. I think she qualifies as a lobbyist.
And that's my point. I think there needs to be a lot more interpretation on that term and a clear understanding. And I'd like to have the city attorneys also get involved in on this because they, I think, have a more clear understanding on what that term really means. And my position is that I don't want to see certain information leaving City Hall in a reasonable manner and utilized in people's position that I think there needs to be a cooling off period. I really do, especially on staff, because in my opinion, staff is just as important as these elected officials and the mayor up here. And I would fairly say this, is that a lot of that staff has just as much knowledge, if not more knowledge, than some of you sitting up here. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Others on this item? Yeah, I'm going to recommend that we ask the auditor to form some kind of a work group with some more representation from our offices. I'm not going to be here next week, so I don't think this could come back to the council that quickly. So I'd like to maybe set this over for 30 days and give you the chance to form a work group and work on some of the issues that have been raised today.
I would be happy to follow up on some of the issues that were raised and to talk more with you all about those issues.
Great, good, thank you. Okay.
Can I just
Sure.
respond to something? Commissioner Salzman, I just have to come to the defense of Deborah Scroggin. This is not, we came here today because this code exists already, and we have had some activity in the last year where we got to investigate cases and to try out those enforcement mechanisms. And we found that there were some gaps there and some problems. And so we came here today in good faith to try to strengthen the code that exists. I said at the outset that we were not trying to wildly expand things, and that we were trying to keep it within the resources that we already devote to this program. And Deborah did not go off to a conference and come up with some wild hair idea to come back here. And I just am very disappointed that you characterized why we were here that way, and that is an unfair representation of Deborah's role.
I guess I differ with you because when I met with you on this rule, I expressed to you from the outset my concern about extending this 2-year no contact period, whatever you want to call it. And I asked, cooling off period. I asked where she got this idea, and she said at a conference. It was a best practice listed. So you were there. You were in that same meeting.
And it is a best practice. And I think we've
But it
had
was at a conference.
testimony.
She said she learned it at a conference.
I don't believe that's what I said.
No,
she said.
But I don't believe that's true. I don't think she
okay.
learned this at a conference.
We can settle that later.
Yeah.
So let me suggest that.
I won't attest for my memory 100%, but I'm pretty clear on that. I would not have gone out on a limb like that if I didn't believe that to be the case.
Well, I think if you disagree with provisions and you did express that, there's ways that you can do that. But I just wanted to call you on the fact that was, I think, very unfair to Deborah.
Duly noted. All right, so I'm going to continue this to May 11th.
Actually, Mayor, speaking solely for myself, I just wanted to make one comment, which is that I think that there's pieces of this proposal which strike me as no-brainers that I would think that we could implement pretty quickly, and I would hope people agree with. I thought that the changing from 8 hours to 8 hours or $1,000 sounds perfectly reasonable, and raising the penalty threshold from 500 to 3,000 for multiple violations, that strikes me as eminently reasonable too. So it may be that we can split apart the less controversial and more controversial pieces of this proposal and enact something like those very quickly with no work grouping.
Okay, that's a good idea. Maybe we can try to do that as well. Okay, so I'll continue this to May 11th, give that process a chance to work. Thank you very much. Okay, let's take the final item on the calendar, please.
Item 374, establish reporting requirements for political consultants.
Okay, Commissioner Fish.
Thank you, Mayor. And by the way, originally we had divided up the 90 minutes, 5 minutes for the auditor on hers and 85 minutes with mine. So I want to apologize in advance. We may be a little bit behind schedule here.
Have at it.
I'm pleased to bring this ethics reform package to council today for your consideration. It builds on the reforms adopted by the council in 2005 and the pioneering work of the city of San Francisco. It was developed in partnership with the auditor, the elections officer, and a number of well-regarded local public interest groups. And I would say, very importantly, it is straightforward and easy to administer. Let me start with some context. City of Portland is committed to open, transparent, and accountable government. And the public has a right to know who is influencing important public policy decisions at the city. In 2005, as we've discussed at length today, led by then Commissioner Sam Adams, the city tightened its rules on the registration and the reporting for lobbyists. A decade later, the political landscape has changed quite a bit. Political consultants now exercise enormous influence that arguably exceeds that of lobbyists. They enjoy privileged, confidential access to the people they help to elect, and therefore it is no surprise that they are doing more lobbying at the local and national level. My ordinance is based on the notion that more sunshine is a good thing, and the public has a right to know who is influencing the decisions that we make. Here is how it would work. The ordinance defines who qualifies as a political consultant. It lists activities typically done by political consultants. And when a political consultant provides services to a city elected official, both parties are obligated to disclose the relationship to the public. The simple act of registration and reporting will provide the public with more information about who is influencing important decisions. Now, as I mentioned, my proposal is modeled after the reforms pioneered by San Francisco, but we adapt and right-size them for our community. And unlike San Francisco, this ordinance would not create a prohibition on lobbying for any period of time after activity as a political consultant has ended. And while I initially supported this concept, we have been advised by the city attorney that it may run afoul of the free speech provisions of the Oregon Constitution, and that, of course, is Article 1, Section 8. This ordinance also closes a loophole under state disclosure laws. Under state law, a candidate for office must disclose payments to a political consultant. However, if a political consultant provides services, quote, for which no compensation is asked or given, end quote, a campaign is not required to disclose the relationship. My ordinance proposes to close this loophole by connecting disclosure to the activities, not the compensation of the consultant. The proposed ordinance defines narrowly who is a political consultant. Specifically, a political consultant is someone who engages in political consulting services as a trade or profession, and those services are defined in some detail. Volunteers and city employees are exempted. If this ordinance is adopted, the city will not prevent someone from acting both as a political consultant and as a lobbyist at the same time. However, for the first time, the public will be able to know when this is happening. In our democracy, political consultants do important work. This ordinance will ensure that in Portland, they do it in the full light of day. Mayor, I have a panel that's prepared to testify, and just procedurally, would you like me to offer the amendment first and then bring the panel up?
Whichever you'd like.
I have an amendment which I'd like to present before the council, which makes a very simple change to the ordinance.
Like this is amendment, this is your email.
All right.
There you go.
Does everyone have it?
We will. There we go.
I believe this ordinance has been discussed with each of my colleagues. An issue came up, we got some feedback about the fact that from time to time, or let's say more frequently, consultants provide services to a campaign committee for the benefit of the candidate. It was an oversight on our part in terms of the drafting. So this amendment would define a political consultant as someone that provides services to a city elected official, a successful candidate for office, or a successful candidate's principal campaign committee registered with the Oregon Secretary of State. And it is there a second?
Second, yep.
Okay, that's on the
That's
table.
on the table, and Mayor, I'd like to invite our panel to come forward. Give me 1 second here, I'm buried in paper. So, I'd like to invite the following people to come forward. Kate Titus from Oregon Common Cause, Aram Andresian from Represent Us, Hugh McGavick, a concerned citizen, and Debbie Iona from the League of Women Voters of Portland.
Good afternoon, welcome.
Welcome, everybody. Kate, would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure. So I am submitting this testimony on behalf of Common Cause in my role as the Executive Director of Common Cause Oregon. And I've been up here before and spoke to who Common Cause is. I am here to express support for the ordinance. We've reviewed it and given some thought, and I've also reviewed it with other colleagues or within Common Cause, our legal director and others who deal with this in other states, and feel quite confident that this is a good direction to go in. I wanted to just speak primarily about why I think this ordinance matters, and in my testimony, I speak a little bit to the reasons why we have ethics rules generally, but since I just spoke to that, I won't repeat myself. But I think inevitably the role of political consultants is one that creates those conflicts. And it's not simply a matter of a few bad apples who are trying to game the system in some way or use the information that they, or the expertise or the access they have gotten in one situation to gain advantage in another. Even those political consultants who would really like to avoid any conflicts really can't do so because they cannot firewall their own brain. I mean, so again, it's not a matter of bad intent, but the nature of the consultant role and the increasing ways that the consultants are playing roles, I think creates these conflicts, and it's to our advantage to have both transparency and eventually guidance in terms of how to navigate them. I would also say that from a national perspective, this problem appears to be on the rise, and I expect it's likely to get worse. As campaigning and lobbying evolves, we're seeing political consultants come into more and more roles where there are conflicts. So I think we haven't seen this be a significant problem. It's been raised up here in Portland, but we have not yet had to really deal with it. But I think it's only a matter of time where we will. For instance, as in New York, where we've seen both the mayor of New York City and the governor really under intense scrutiny and lambasted in the press for the situations they've been in dealing with political consultants. So I think it's smart for Portland to get ahead of the problem before it raises itself up repeatedly and the public and press response to it grows harsher. I'll just say briefly that I think this is a good approach. I think it's a good first step. Transparency is always the first key when dealing with conflicts of interest. It's a necessary piece, and it's the foundation for doing anything further. So that's a great place to start. I think eventually we're going to want to go beyond transparency, setting some guidelines for how to navigate these. I think, looking to San Francisco's model or guidelines for recusal. But I think given that this is new territory, simply making sure that these relationships are transparent is a great first step. I also think that eventually we may want to broaden the definition so that it doesn't exempt those professional fundraisers and pollsters who only do that from the definition of political consultant. My understanding is that it significantly makes it easier to manage, and I think that's a good trade-off. If it's more practical to implement by narrowing the definition simply, that's a good place to start. But at some point, we might want to review that and think further about it. But overall, I think the policy as written is very reasonable.
Could you just explain that, please, to me? It's late in the day and I'm not following.
Yeah,
that.
my understanding, if it's still in the measure, and the Commissioner Fish can
Yep.
answer this, but is that in the definition set of political consultants.
So I'll give you the citation because my colleagues have it. It's 2.14.020 definitions. Subcapital C, there's a carve-out for attorneys who provide only legal services, accountants who provide only accounting services, professional fundraisers, or pollsters who provide only polling services.
And why did we take out pollsters?
Well, because we thought that was sufficiently removed from the consultant. Consultants often hire pollsters to provide information. I can't think, I'm not familiar with it. I'd be hard pressed to think of an example of a pollster who then becomes a lobbyist. They tend to have a unique role, and they provide information to a consultant that then takes that information. We deliberately, and I think your testimony made, I think, frame this nicely. We deliberately tried to come in with sort of phase one that was easy to explain, narrowly tailored, and easy to administer without any substantial new costs, so we could test drive it and then see what additional changes we want. And this is and we also borrowed heavily, Commissioner Fritz, from the experience in San Francisco.
Okay. And I received some input from Felisa Higgins at SEIU. Is this language,
So
does that respond to her
the
concern?
concern that Apano and SEIU and some other organizations have raised is they want to make sure that the definition is tight enough that someone isn't inadvertently caught in the political consultant mesh. And so I am going to propose legislative history, because there's going to be rulemaking that is designed to make clear that the universe of people covering this is not meant to be endless, that it really is focused on people who are primarily involved in the business of political consulting. We want to start with that class of people and see how this works. And just like the public interest groups who under the lobbying code wanted to make sure they had a safe harbor so they could, under 8 hours or whatever, they could do some things without being burdened by regulations. We don't want this to be so expansive that, frankly, it results in a situation where people don't know whether they're covered or not. We want some clear lines to begin with.
And are you also trying to make it so that nobody has to be registered as both a lobbyist and a political consultant, or not?
No, it's a dual registration because it's the person may be functioning in one capacity, in a dual capacity. They're not prohibited from which.
Okay.
We just think that there's a heightened level of. We think the public has a heightened level of expectation of transparency if someone who is both a political consultant is simultaneously lobbying, because obviously that person has. I was trying to think of an analogy. The only person that is similar to a political consultant who might be lobbying me is my wife. And I only say that because just as my wife is privy to lots of confidential information about me, covered, thank God, by the marital privilege, to the extent my political consultant is also very aware about things about me, which I disclose in order to get good services, they have a unique relationship with the elected.
Got it, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kate.
Sir, did you finish?
That was really the essence. I commend you for looking into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, I'm Mary Mandriesi, and I'm representing Represent Portland. First, I'd like to thank Commissioner Fish and his staff for writing this ordinance and for inviting me to testify today. I'd also like to thank Commissioner Fritz for connecting me with him. That was very good of you. So earlier it was mentioned that these smaller groups at City Hall don't often represent Portlanders. I just want you guys to know that though we're still small and growing, I represent a grassroots movement made out of soccer moms, graphic designers, neurosurgeons, and more. Pretty much the only thing we have in common is that we're Portlanders who are passionate about improving our democracy, and we're willing to volunteer our time and be really late to class in order to do that.
Sorry about that.
No problem. While we care about pretty much the gambit of honest elections issues, one of our main values is ensuring that anyone who lobbies is playing by the same rules as lobbyists, regardless of their title or official position. This is a common sense approach, and this addendum to Chapter 214 would close a gaping loophole in Portland's largely respectable ethics code. Represent Portland supports this and hopes to see it passed today. That said, I hope everyone here recognizes this ordinance as a small stepping stone and not a stopping point. The lack of a revolving door clause between time spent as a consultant and time spent lobbying that same official serves to weaken the impact of this ordinance immensely. While there are concerns over Oregon's constitutional guarantee of free speech as it relates to this ordinance, I hope someone will rise to the challenge of reinforcing it in the years to come. Where am I here? Represent Portland's members envision a future where cities like San Francisco look to us as a paragon of political transparency, not the other way around. We will continue working on good legislation like this until that becomes a reality. Thank you all for your time.
By the way, thank you for your contribution, and Commissioner Fritz, thank you for making that connection. Yet another of the many dividends of serving with Commissioner Fritz. And the one, as you know, the prohibition on lobbying after you cease being a political consultant is something I'm very interested in, and it's functioning now in San Francisco. There's two issues that we've learned about. One is that San Francisco has about 18 people in their ethics office administering their law with a huge budget. And so it's administratively a lot more expensive and burdensome. And we did not want to impose an unreasonable first round of requirements on the auditor and her office. And the second is the two constitutions, the California Constitution, the Oregon Constitution, are sufficiently different. And we in Portland know that because virtually every variation on sit-lie has been declared unconstitutional under the Oregon Constitution. So I thought rather than risk having the entire package caught up in litigation, we get something launched and then see if there's something we could add to.
And this is a great example of thinking of the previous ordinance of somebody who took one of my constituent spots, came and told me what he was wanting to work on. I said, well, I know Commissioner Fish is working on that, go talk to him. And then you got in at the ground level, you helped shape this proposal. So it's an excellent example of actually the Portland City government is open, accountable. I'm sure you showed up on my calendar and have now helped craft this ordinance. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You can go to class if you need to get away. Or maybe you could skip it and use us as an excuse.
I got to get to Wilsonville in rush hour traffic, so I don't think it's even going to happen.
Good luck on that.
Sorry. Welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Hugh McGavick. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And I'm a concerned citizen, and because Aram got invited to Commissioner Fish's office to discuss this, he invited me. So to further the loop, I got pulled in as well. So thank you very much. I'm here in part on behalf of Represent Us, but substantially as a concerned citizen. And it was interesting going through the sausage making of putting together an ordinance from the desired right size to follow the San Francisco 60-month prohibition between leaving political consultant to lobbying. And the 2-year sounded like a reasonable compromise to me. I'm sorry that couldn't get through this time. I now see how it's gotten to the point where we are at openers, and you've identified a problem, which is constructive, and you've created mechanisms for identifying and reporting certain activities. That's constructive. That's a step forward. The omission of a time frame is problematic in that I can envision where a political consultant goes into one of your 5 offices, and you're the only 5 this ordinance covers, and giving information and guidance as a political consultant, and then saying, by the way, now I want to lobby you on this. And I think that's just that would be tremendously inappropriate, and the appearance of fairness would be it would be really foul, and I think there needs to be some sort of distancing. If you've gotten as far as you can get this time, okay, but this is a primer for where you have to go later to avoid those appearances of impropriety and conflict of interest, and to let the sun shine in. I appreciate the civics lesson of sitting down here for the last couple of hours. Not that I'm a martyr for having done it. You've been here all day. And you are all to be commended for the civility you've exhibited towards everyone who's come before you, and this meeting and every other one I've been to. And so thank you very much for that. The ordinance should be passed as it appears to be the best it can be at this time.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I just want to make sure you know what the current law is. If I understood you right, you were describing a situation in which a political consultant was sitting in one of our offices talking about giving. You mean political giving?
No,
Okay,
sir.
because that's
What
against the
what
law.
The distinction I'm making is magic words here. Political consultants come in, give things. They give advice, they give guidance,
all right.
direction, whereas a lobbyist comes to get something.
Yeah,
So-
okay.
So
All
that's
right.
my distinction.
Yeah, I understand. Just want to make sure you understood that conducting political campaign business on city property is illegal under state law. So we don't.
Okay, well, that's a distinction I didn't know either,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, very important.
Debbie, welcome back.
I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League is pleased to support the political consultant registration and reporting proposal. The League works at all levels of government to increase access to information and protect the public's right to know. We support reforms of this nature because they reveal information on the pressures exerted on the policy-making process. Based on our conversations with Commissioner Fish and his staff, we understand that blurring the lines between political consulting and lobbying is a relatively new phenomenon. We commend the Commissioner for developing a proposal that addresses this new reality and takes an important first step in shining a light on these relationships. The League urges your support. We are also pleased that the Auditor's Office plans to incorporate this new program into the existing lobbying registration and reporting system. The information will be more readily accessible to the public, and this approach should add to the ease of administration. The League encourages the auditor to evaluate the effectiveness of this program after it has been in place for a period of time. It is possible Portland might want to follow San Francisco's lead with even more comprehensive regulations if necessary. Thank you, Commissioner Fish, and to the auditor for all the work on this.
Mayor, I just want to specifically thank this panel for not only attending meetings and providing great feedback, but wordsmithing, language, testing assumptions, and really helping us fine tune this. And I share the remorse over taking out the prohibited conduct piece. But I don't, my enthusiasm for investigating that and determining if there's a path in the future is unabated. So I thank you very much for your service.
Thank you all. Okay, others that you wanted to call on or just public testimony?
Unless there's other people signed up, Mayor.
Public testimony on this item?
No one else is left.
Okay.
So, could you just clarify the reporting requirements, Commissioner, under this?
It's a dual reporting requirement, so both the elected and the consultant must report on a quarterly basis, must report with the auditor's office. So dual report, and it's not, this for obvious legal reasons, you are not required, as with the lobbying registration and disclosure, to disclose what you talk about. It's simply that you provided consulting services in that quarter.
So it's not requiring that on day 6 I had 5-minute conversation or whatever.
It is to identify that you are in that role so that it becomes transparent. And then if you happen to perform another role, there's a public record that you are performing both roles.
So giving the example of a consultant who was involved in the Fix Our Parks bond measure, that is a past relationship, but is that one that would be, that when this goes into effect, I would document all of the consultants I've ever used?
So this goes into effect in September, and it has a 1-quarter look back. So it covers consulting services provided to the elected official, the successful candidate, or his or her political action committee. This as drafted does not cover a committee for a bond measure.
All right, but
It's a political committee, though, isn't it?
I think it's something to consider, and I appreciate that this is a first step too. We kind of want to know, I mean, if it goes into effect in September, Lord willing, I might win in May, and so I wouldn't have a political consultant in the reporting period. In fact, I don't have one anyway, so this may be moot. But the point is, it's not just in the previous quarter. We want to know, or is your intention it's forward-looking?
May I make a suggestion? Because the issue you're raising about not the candidate's principal campaign committee, but a campaign committee on behalf of a measure, a ballot measure. Because my amendment makes clear that if the services are rendered to you or to your committee, then they have to be disclosed. It became harder to define the relationships around a political action committee set up for a ballot measure because there's lots of cooks in the kitchen. There's lots of people who technically benefit. It's less clear what the relationships are. So our initial effort here is limited to the elected official, a successful candidate, and a principal campaign committee for the elected, not another campaign committee that's established for the purpose of driving a ballot measure.
So then, in the following quarter, after the election's all done, thank goodness, whenever the quarter is after that, what's the reporting requirement of that same or a different political consultant to say, I contacted X?
Well, let's use a concrete example. In my last campaign, I hired Jake Weigler to be my consultant. Once the campaign ended, if Jake came to see me 6 months later after I was sworn in for my new term to talk to me about my political future, to discuss my fact that I've had a precipitous decline in my polling, that at the rate I'm going, I won't see another term, or whatever. Well, he's providing political consultant services to me. We'd have to disclose that in that quarter, he was my consultant.
Right.
Even though there's no active election. It's just that, and my sense, and looking at some of the headlines around the country right now, confirms it. You know, a political consultant is often someone that handles your major election, but then you sort of get married to throughout your political career because they're the kind of person that can come and give you ongoing advice about how to be effective in your job. All we're saying is that in each quarter in which that person provides that service to you, you and the consultant have a duty to disclose it to the auditor. Just the fact that you have that relationship.
And that's whether or not they ever do any lobbying.
Correct, because they would be picked up as lobbyists if they did a lobbyist, and then if they did lobby, and then you'd have a situation where the public would know that my consultant was also lobbying me. We're not putting a prohibition on that, we're just shining a light on it. Now, in my case, my consultant is not allowed by mutual agreement to lobby me, but this approach is heavy on sunshine and disclosure, light on regulation, and in part because of issues like cost and constitution and others. And it is, as has been noted, it's a first step. It's piggybacking off the existing framework. It's not unduly burdensome, but it shines a light at least on that unique relationship between elected and political consultant.
Commissioner, I have a question, which is, what do I do about my wife's aunt, with whom I'm having dinner in another hour and a half? My wife's aunt happens to be a professional political consultant, and it is quite possible that when I have dinner with her, she will have some left-wing bee in her bonnet, and she'll start ranting about it, and she'll tell me, you should give a speech about this. And I might even think it's a good idea. Now, as I read this, it says the political consulting services include developing, assisting in strategic communication, such as news releases, talking points, and speech writing. Now, I have to tell you, there might be times when I wish that I could tell my wife's aunt, no, you can't suggest that to me because you're not registered. But there might be other times when I don't feel like it's politic to tell her to stop talking. So would my wife's aunt have to register in order to rant at me? Why not?
Because the primary purpose of her work is not providing political consulting services to you.
Right, but the way I read what it says is that the term political consultant does not include a person who does not engage in political consulting services as a trade or profession, and she does.
Excellent point. So when Commissioner Fritz earlier flagged the question that was sort of a first cousin of what you're raising, which is, what if there's someone who is a political operative for an organization that has a conversation with you about your future in politics? Because that person's primary purpose is not to provide political consulting services to you, under under the rules that we're going to, that the auditor is going to draft with legislative intent, that person would not be covered.
So in order to be covered, does the person have to have been paid by you to provide political consulting
No,
services?
that's the loophole we close. So under state law, the trigger is, for disclosure, is some kind of payment, and the loophole is someone declaring that they're a volunteer and therefore not foregoing compensation. That consultant would not show up on a C&E.
But this does not seem to me like there is going to be a clear distinction because, I mean, well, but let's say, Mark Weiner has been my political consultant. He's
Right.
also a close personal friend of mine.
Right.
If 2 years after the last time I paid him for something, we had a conversation as friends and he commented on something, I could see I actually don't know whether under these rules he would have to have registered or not. I mean, in the context of that conversation, his primary intent might not be to advise me in my political career, but to just, we're having a conversation about some political issue.
Steve, I think one way to get at that, and we can come up with all kinds of hypotheticals, the rulemaking is going to have to get at some of this. Unsolicited political advice is not intended to be covered by this. And the fact that you have lots of friends who are thoughtful people who also happen to be political consultants and you like to talk politics, we are not trying to turn your dinner and your dinner parties into a nightmare of reporting requirements. However, since you used the example of your consultant, if you have an ongoing relationship with, a first-tier consultant who is giving you advice, compensated or not, then yes, you will probably err on the side of reporting that in that quarter you had that he provided some services to you. You don't have to disclose what they were. You're not he's not subsequently barred from doing anything else in your life. But the closer it gets to that line, you might want to disclose that he was providing consulting services. We decouple the trigger here from compensation. It is the service that is the trigger, not compensation.
Right, okay, but where you would draw the line is whether that person's primary relationship to you is as a political consultant or as something else?
Whether their primary role is to be to provide political consulting services to a city elected official. And there's lots of people that we interact with that are with organizations, nonprofits, advocacy groups, where their primary purpose in life is not to be your political consultant. But they also may be custodians of interesting information about the political landscape they're going to share with you, such as an advocacy group that says, Oregonians think sick leave is a great thing. You should support it. We're not trying to make that conversation into a reportable conversation because that person is your quote-unquote political consultant.
The other question I had, and actually you might have addressed this when I was briefly out of the room, is I heard a conversation about whether pollsters should be included. I think somebody else raised the question of whether professional fundraisers should be included. And I actually think that professional fundraisers, if you're going to have a rule like this, definitely should be included because the kind of advice people give you about what would be best in your political career in terms of getting money from people I think that people would want to know about that. Who's advising you as to how you should comport yourself in a way that would to raise the most money.
We carved it out because we found it more difficult to show that sort of connection. That's a council decision. What I will say, Commissioner Novick, is that the rulemaking for this particular proposal is going to require, under the rulemaking, the auditor will invite the public to comment, and there'll be a process to try to create some rules which anticipate some of these questions. I hope that if this is adopted, you will participate in that process to create some clarity on where you think there's a gray or an edge. We're trying to make this as clear as possible in terms of enforcement.
So I also stepped out of the room for a second, but does this apply to all citywide elected? City council and the auditor?
It currently applies to the 5 of us.
Should it not apply to all citywide elected officers?
Well, we didn't draft it as such. That's the council's. The council is free to make that determination.
I would think it's good. I mean, their political consultants work for auditor candidates probably in the past as well. So I guess I would make that amendment.
Second.
Okay. Madam Auditor, would you care to be heard on that? We happen to have an auditor here who can testify, followed by Marshall McLuhan.
I think that The auditor's office was carved out of this process in an earlier iteration when there was some discussion about appeals going to the hearings office. And since the hearings office is in my office, that created a conflict. And so now I think the code says that it's going to circuit court. So there's no problem with the auditor being included in this at all.
Thank you for that very clear
Okay,
explanation.
good, that works. Thank you.
So we now have two amendments before the council.
Okay,
Can I have a clarifying question? I was trying to find out the answer, but I'll just ask it here. The amendment that you've proposed, Commissioner,
Yes.
adds or a successful candidate's principal campaign committee register with the Secretary of State.
Right.
Can you explain the reason for that addition?
Yes. So the way it was originally drafted, we were trying to figure out what was the relationship between the consultant and the elected that created a reportable event. Upon getting some feedback from both practitioners and others looking at this, we realized that typically in a campaign, it is the campaign committee which retains the consultant. So when I run for reelection, Friends of Nick Fish goes out and is the entity which hires the professionals in my life, even though they're clearly providing services to me. By not including campaign committee, we were inadvertently creating a loophole where a consultant could provide services to you, but be recorded as being engaged by your committee, and it would not trigger a duty to disclose. And since the way we structure our campaigns, we typically run all of our money through our campaign committees. By law, we're required to have a committee, and they are the party that pays for services, retains people. We don't do that individually. We just wanted to clarify that the consultant who provides services includes that provides services to our committee on our behalf, which is typically how the consultant relationship is structured with most campaigns. Jake Weigler was hired by my campaign committee, not by me personally. I wasn't on the hook to hire him. Yet he provided services to me as the candidate. So we're just clarifying, and it was a good catch by the folks we were talking to and by city attorney's office, that we don't want to imply inadvertently that you can get around this requirement by saying, well, that's not my consultant, it's the consultant of my campaign committee.
Okay, that I understand that. The campaign manager may or may not be a member of the campaign committee as registered by the state. Is that correct? So what I'm wondering about is you're intending to get at the volunteer consultant as well as the paid consultant. So the paid consultant would be paid by the campaign committee. Is there maybe a refinement? Maybe this is another step later, where it's a volunteer, the person who may be a paid political consultant but is not being paid by this campaign is giving advice to a campaign manager who is not on the campaign committee.
That person is covered. I understand where you're going in trying to create it's almost like a shell. It's like a shell game to try to insulate the elected from the relationship. A consultant that provides services on behalf of the candidate, directly or indirectly, under this law, under this proposal, for which they receive compensation or no compensation, is required to disclose that they're providing services. And I think potentially the issue you're raising can be clarified through rulemaking, but it is my intent that there not be any. This is meant to be low barrier. If you're a political consultant and you are providing services to a candidate or elected under this, you must register and disclose.
Okay.
But I appreciate that you're raising an issue that perhaps through rulemaking we can clarify.
so should we act on the amendments?
We have testimony. Do we have open testimony on this?
We already did have testimony on this, I think, unless I've missed anyone. So let's take action on the first amendment, which is the change to subsection C, which Commissioner Fish provided in printed form.
Thank you.
Further discussion of that? Just take a vote on that amendment, please.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Novick.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Now, the other amendment, I was just looking at the ordinance, I think we may need to do a little quick surgery here, and that is, it looks to me like finding number 5 needs to have the phrase specifically the mayor and city commissioners removed from it. And then definitions, A, city elected official means the mayor, comma, or a city commissioner, comma, or the auditor. I think that might do it. It's still a little, I'm just trying to think this through. I think conceptually it makes sense to have the auditor subject to the same rules because auditor is an elected official too. But the auditor's adopting the rules, the auditor initiates action in circuit court. I'm trying to think that through as to whether that makes any sense for the auditor to be the person filing in circuit court on a case involving the auditor. Help me out, city attorney.
Can they recuse themselves?
Well, I don't know. That's why we ask, or at least that's why I ask.
So I'm batting substitute today. I'll do my best. I think the answer is that in most circumstances, it obviously will not be a problem. I think we can probably use the administrative rules to figure out a process for the auditor delegating that function of making a decision. If we find out we can't, we can certainly come back with an amendment. But I don't see it as being a tremendous barrier, and I do understand. I think the amendment to add the auditor makes some sense. So we can certainly work with that.
So the two changes that I just iterated, do you think that does it for now? In terms of both the
yes,
finding number 5, where it's just mentioning the mayor and city commissioners at the moment till we change it, and then definition A, adding the auditor there. It appears to me from just a quick look through this that might do it.
Yes, I think just for grammatical beauty, I think I would have it read means the mayor, comma, city commissioner, or auditor. I think you had an extra
Get
or
rid of
in
the
there.
or A. All right. And grammatical beauty is always one of the options. All right.
No Oxford comma, I'm very disappointed.
If you would like an Oxford comma, that's fine.
The mayor has forgotten more about grammar and syntax than most of us know here, and I'm offended by the
So
information.
I'm glad to hear attention to detail, Mayor. It does raise another question for me in looking through this in 214.070 prohibited conduct. It says a city elected official shall not utilize a political consultant who has violated this chapter. That might seem a bit harsh if there was an inadvertent or a first-time offense that they didn't understand the rules or whatever, and corrected that as soon as it was brought to their attention. We had that discussion under the previous, that you get to amend your lobbying rules. To say that a political consultant who's violated the chapter is never, ever going to be employed ever again in the city of Portland doesn't seem reasonable.
I believe it's a present tense. That shall not utilize, I see your point. It's not meant to be a lifetime bar. I appreciate your point, and it's really shall not utilize a political consultant who has violated this chapter and continues, or
How about repeatedly violated?
or during a period of repeated violations. Yeah, you're right. It was not meant to be the heavy hand of dictating.
One strike and you're out forever.
I would accept a friendly amendment on that. Shall not utilize a political consultant who has repeatedly violated this chapter?
What I just said.
What do you think? Heidi, or
I think repeatedly is a
Lindley,
little
or
hard.
whoever would like to take a shot at that.
Because repeatedly versus,
How about this? Who is in violation?
You see the problem?
Well, and I'm also, the issue here is enforcement by the auditor and putting them in a situation. I think with the direction, if there is some intent that you can give to the auditor staff so that when they come up with if you want to put in repeatedly and give some idea of what you mean by that, meaning we don't intend for somebody who on their first offense makes a minor ticky-tacky error, we mean for it to be somebody who's doing certain things. That would be helpful to the auditor.
Flagrant, would that help?
That's probably hard to define.
Is this, council, can we give legislative intent at the time of vote?
You certainly can.
Or would you just
and we
like,
all- but I
or
think-
would you like to set this over and have more time? I'm not.
No, I
want to get it done. I'd like to get
I
it
would love
done.
to just bring this home, but I'm just saying, we can wordsmith it now, or we can wordsmith it and bring it next week with the vote.
I do think, though, at this point, it is stated in the absolute, and I think if you want to be able to vote next week, this is not an emergency, if you want to be able to vote next week, you probably need to have a modifying word in there at this point.
What do you recommend to soften it, so we're not using the death penalty for every, any violation, including a technical violation?
Commissioner, can I offer a suggestion?
Please.
What about if we said that you shall not knowingly utilize a political consultant who is in violation of this chapter? Because it seems to me that what we want to achieve is that if you, the elected official, know that your political consultant is a violation, you should stop using them until they come into compliance.
I think that's a smart change. By putting the knowing in, you're setting a standard of knowledge and you're raising the burden a little bit.
So I got the first modification, not knowingly, but what was the second one?
Is in violation.
Is in violation of, so.
I think that's a significant improvement. Thank you,
Do
Commissioner
you-
Fritz, for catching it. Thank you, Steve, for wordsmithing.
All right,
To
so.
add the concept of until said consultant comes into compliance.
That we can do by rule. I mean, I think.
You wanna do
there's-
that by rule?
I think
Okay.
it's implied
Okay.
that it's until there's, the implication is until you get to compliance. Can we move that as an amendment, Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just going to include that in the package of changes that we have to this one, which includes the inclusion of the auditor with the appropriate grammar and the changes to 214070A, which we just talked about.
Thank you.
Everybody comfortable with that? So vote to adopt those amendments, please.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Novick.
Aye.
Fritz.
Commissioner Fisher, I really appreciate all your work on this. Aye.
Hales.
Aye.
Mayor,
Okay.
can I, one last matter?
Yes.
This goes to a vote next week. I know you may not be here. I don't know what our complement of team is. May I make a very brief statement?
Sure.
I want to thank Linda Law, Ben Walters, Jim Blackwood, and Sonia Schmansky for the tremendous work they put into this. The lawyers really gave us their A effort in helping us draft this. The wordsmithing on this is complicated, and we really appreciate their work. Jim Blackwood in my office and Sonia Schmansky did great work. I really want to thank the citizen volunteers from distinguished local public interest groups who came to the table and helped us get it right. And I'll have some additional comments next week, but I do view this as a first step. And if adopted next week, as I expect it will be, I think we can rightfully be proud of becoming the second city in the country to put in place this mechanism, which I think is a common sense reform, which again which uses the tool of transparency to give the public more information about how we do our business. And I'm extremely proud of the work that's gone into this. And thank you.
Thank you very much. So that passes the second reading, and we're recessed till tomorrow at 6 p.m.